Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the House Appropriations Committee Chairwoman Maggie McIntosh, we'd like to welcome everyone to today's virtual bill hearing on February 24th, 2021. This afternoon, we have 10 bills that we will be hearing. The first bill is sponsored by Delegate Ivey. It's House Bill 723, Public Institutions of Higher Education, Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Individuals, Academic and Employment Opportunities. Delegate Ivey, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, Madam Chair, colleagues. For the record, Delegate Julian Ivey here presenting House Bill 723. House Bill 723 is introduced, requires the Maryland Higher Education Commission, MHEC, to establish a process to provide information and outreach to specified incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals regarding education and employment opportunities at public institutions of higher education after release from incarceration. This process only applies to individuals who were employed by MCE during this period of incarceration, but I would certainly support expanding this legislation. Individuals released from incarceration deserve employment and educational opportunities that will help improve their standard of life and reduce their chances of recidivism. These individuals have lost significant opportunities for professional and educational advancement while completing their sentence. On top of this, upon their release, these individuals face significant barriers to employment and other important resources, which only increases the possibility of these individuals being reincarcerated. Creating a pathway for these individuals to access employment and educational opportunities at public institutions of higher education is not only the right thing to do, but it's responsible public policy. I'm joined by the SGA president at the University of Maryland, a handful of other students as well. We're here asking for a favorable report on House Bill 723. And of course, I'm right here if you have any questions. Thank you.
Very much, Delegate Ivey. And if the committee, if we could hear testimony from a series of individuals who are in favor of the bill, they're also provided written testimony. This afternoon, we also have joining our committee from the Judiciary Committee, we have Delegate Stain, Delegate Watson, and Delegate Shetty. We welcome them for joining us today on this bill hearing. First for testimony, for favorable testimony, is Maria Travato, the Prison Resistance Project. And to Ms. Travato, we have 2-minute time limit on testimony from witnesses, and to all the other witnesses, 2-minute time limit. Ms. Travato, please proceed when you're ready.
Hello, my name is Maria Travato, and I'm a student at the University of Maryland. I'm here representing the Prison Resistance Project, a student activist organization that advocates for prison abolition and works to combat injustices in the criminal legal system. I'd like to thank Chair McIntosh, Vice Chair Chang, and all the members of the committee for allowing me the chance to speak today. I'd also like to thank Delegate Ivey for sponsoring this legislation, which will give admissions help and preferential admissions to formerly incarcerated MCE workers and help them get jobs with the university system. Incarcerated workers of MCE are paid a fraction of the state minimum wage, and the University of Maryland has been one of the primary beneficiaries of their exploited labor. As students, we've known for years that our chairs, desks, and tables are created through prison labor. Yet despite relying on their labor, we do nothing to support these workers. MCE workers usually leave prison with no job prospects, no education, and no savings. Those released from prison already face discrimination in the workforce, and incarceration makes it difficult for individuals to receive a college education. In 2017, only 1% of the US prison population had a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree. Many incarcerated people come home to poverty with little opportunities for a stable future. Over half the people recently returning from prison are unemployed. This majorly contributes to their likelihood of being reincarcerated. As of 2018, 40% of returning citizens to Maryland are rearrested within 3 years. We must also remember that over 70% of Maryland's prison population is Black, compared to only 31% of the state. There is no question that our prisons systematically exploit Black people for their labor while robbing them of future stability. Through this bill, our university system can allow for formerly incarcerated people to attain some stability once they're released from prison. This will not only contribute to their well-being, but to the well-being of their families and communities. This is the very least that we can do. And while we strongly support this bill, we want to recognize that there should be programs like this for all incarcerated people, whether or not they've worked for MCE. We must also recognize that this bill primarily benefits those who are released from prison, while little is done for those who are still incarcerated. If we wish to end our state's and our country's commitment to mass incarceration, we need to recognize the humanity of those within prisons and work to substantially decrease the prison population. Therefore, we strongly urge you to give a favorable report to this piece of legislation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Votto. Next, we have Ms. Zara Siddiq.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zara Siddiq, and I'm president of NAACP, where we work to inform youth of the problems affecting minorities and to advance the economic, education, social, and political status of minorities in their harmonious cooperation with other peoples. I would like to thank Chair McIntosh and all the members of the Appropriations Committee for the opportunity to share our thoughts on this important bill. I'm speaking to you today to express my support for HB 723. It is time that we acknowledge the hypocrisy of our system and shed light upon incarcerated people's education and rights. According to the Maryland Correctional Enterprises annual report in 2019, incarcerated people's pay ranges from 17 to 36 cents an hour for a 4 to 5 day work week. According to the Baltimore Sun report in 2019, the Black Maryland prison population exceeded 70% in 2018 compared to the 31% in the state population. These two facts inevitably prove that the MCE is taking advantage of incarcerated and already marginalized people's labor. I would like to point out that the feedback given to students, staff, and elected officials from incarcerated peoples have been positive towards the MCE regarding the opportunity to work certain jobs that give them the ability to pass the time and to earn wages. Due to this fact, I believe it is beneficial for us to further aid incarcerated people's situation, providing them education and a better opportunity to start their lives after their time has been served. Enacting this bill allows us to follow the footsteps of other institutions that see this hypocrisy as well, such as Georgetown University, who is giving preferential admission to descendants of slaves who were sold by the university, as well as faculty, staff, and alumni. In a state where we have the highest rate of Black people incarcerated, systemic inequality needs to be addressed. This bill takes a step towards remedying this issue, which is why I'm asking you to vote yes on HB 723. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Siddiq. Next, we will have Mr. Dan Alpert with the University of Maryland Student Government Association.
Thank you. My name is Dan Alpert, and I'm the student body president at the University of Maryland College Park. I'd like to start by thanking Vice Chair Chang and the Appropriations Committee for the opportunity to share our thoughts on this bill, as well as Delegate Ivey for introducing this legislation, which will improve access to employment and academic opportunities for those who are currently and formerly incarcerated. In our state, all state agencies are required to buy furniture from the Maryland Correctional Enterprises. The USM accounts for nearly 20% of the MCE's annual sales, which were more than $50 million in fiscal year 2019. At the same time, incarcerated people employed by the MCE make substantially less than the state's minimum wage. MCE employee salaries range from 17 cents to $1.16 an hour. The fact that MCE workers are underpaid means that we have taken advantage of their labor during their period of incarceration. This also disproportionately negatively impacts Black Marylanders. 70% of the state's prison population is Black, more than twice the national average and more than twice the percentage of Black individuals in the state. To remedy this disparity, this legislation proposes that a process be established specifically for formerly incarcerated individuals to apply for jobs at and admissions to public colleges and universities in the state. Included in this process is a requirement for outreach and assistance on part of the universities. While we believe that the current prison employment system is unfair from a racial and economic perspective, we also understand its necessity and the positive opportunities it may provide toward reducing recidivism. Instead of terminating this relationship, this will build a new relationship. This legislation draws inspiration from public institutions across the country that offer specifically tailored programs for incarcerated people, and from Georgetown University, where the descendants of slaves once owned by the university are offered preferential admission. We recognize that a program as novel as this will require a lot of work, yet the services it provides will truly make a difference. And for these reasons, we strongly urge the committee to issue a favorable report on House Bill 723. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alpert. The committee will now take questions from the members of the Appropriations Committee and also the members who are visiting us from Judiciary Committee. Are there any questions to the sponsor or to the witnesses in favor of this bill? Delegate Trent Kittleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I don't know, there is one piece of information in our committee testimony, and I didn't know if, Joanne Bauman from the University of Maryland. Is she here to testify today?
Doesn't
And
look like she is.
the reason I ask is because there are some questions that come up if I'm reading her testimony. Because of the way the university is structured, there may be an issue for certain courses and other issues that I think the bill needs to address. I agree with you 100%. I was one of the strong supporters, as was virtually everyone, of the Justice Reinvestment Act. And I think it's absurd that people come out of prison and they're given no help whatsoever. But I think we have to be a little bit more, just a little bit more tailored to the specific thing that you're requesting. And let me ask you, is there any, I don't see in the bill any requirement or criteria. It's for anyone, for example, crimes vary, and some crimes for, rape and that kind of thing would not be appropriate. And I just wondered how you anticipated that would be handled.
Certainly, and thank you for the question, Delegate Kittleman. This is about us taking a holistic approach, looking to ensure that our public institutions are providing support for individuals who have already served their time for whatever crime that they did commit. And so, whether or not this committee looks to put a provision in, as you're discussing, that's completely up to you, sure. But I am a believer in true second chances.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Krim is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So is there a reporting requirement in your bill that the success of the program would be reported to the budget committees?
I do not see a reporting requirement, but it's certainly something that I would be supportive of as well.
Thank you.
Delegate Geraldine Valentina Smith is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the sponsor of the bill for bringing this forward. Two things. I just wanted to note that the community college's written testimony is significant in how much they support the efforts of your bill. I know members of Judiciary Committee are here. I can't recall, Delegate Ivy, do they get diminution credits? I know they're not getting paid a lot and not getting, you highlighted some of the disparities, in terms of the way they might get more for the work that they do give us. But do they get dim credits for their work?
I'm
in
not
terms of their
of that, but what I am aware of is the inability for individuals to have access to these opportunities for employment, and quite frankly, if we were just to provide them with these opportunities, maybe they'd be able to take a different step when they were released from their incarceration step.
No, thank you. It's clear that education is the main pathway to break poverty. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Delegate.
Delegate Mangione is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you for bringing the bill. I'm just trying to understand, make sure I understand correctly, or maybe you can explain it. Now, is there a part you're saying about preferential treatment to the formerly incarcerated individual to attend college? This is what you're saying, and that's where I'm confused. If you can maybe explain, because I see the purpose of the bill and I think it's a good one, but University of Maryland, as the gentleman was discussing earlier, obviously a very competitive school. So would somebody that hasn't been incarcerated potentially miss out on a spot because of the formerly incarcerated person gets that, or could potentially get that? Can you just address that? That's my concern.
Certainly, and it's a fair concern. As drafted, the legislation is fairly clear. It says specifically, to the extent feasible, that preferential treatment be given. There is a response in the fiscal note coming from a handful of our public institutions pointing out that it would be very tough to implement that. And that there would possibly be some legal questions surrounding that piece as well. So Delegate, always willing to work with you on strengthening legislation. The intent, of course, is to ensure that individuals have access to employment opportunities and that they're given the resources also for educational advancement as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Delegate Novotny is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Delegate Ivy, I appreciate the sentiment of this bill, and I believe, giving people second chances is awesome. So I appreciate you putting this forward. It's kind of a follow-on to the last delegate, my colleague's question. To the extent feasible, in your mind, what would that translate into? I mean, is that high school senior graduating with a 2.5 might not get in over someone who just came out of prison, or totally leave it up to the college to figure out where that extent reasonable comes in?
Sir, again, wonderful question. And I think it's certainly something that we do need to deliberate over with more depth to really find a detailed process for how we can move forward on this issue.
Thank you.
The gentleman from the Judiciary Committee is recognized, Delegate Ron Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Delegate Ivy, currently, is college education currently offered to incarcerated individuals in the state of Maryland? And if not, would it make more sense to ensure that it is offered while they are incarcerated?
Oh, there's certainly educational advancements programs that already operate here in the state of Maryland, working with our currently incarcerated residents. This is really just to make sure that once they are released, that they have all of the information that's available. We already have programs set up, but unfortunately, not all of the information is given to these currently incarcerated individuals. And so, when a tree falls in the forest with no one to hear, did it really fall? If we have resources available for individuals who are returning from incarceration, but they don't know about those resources really aren't being utilized the way that they could. And so while this wouldn't change, what takes place within prison, with them being incarcerated, what it does do is provide them with information for when they are released, for how they can get employment at these public institutions.
So let me separate the employment piece from the college education piece.
Sure.
So what I thought I heard you say is that individuals currently have access to a variety of education, but I'm speaking specifically of college credits, the ability to get those while they are incarcerated. I know there was a program at Goucher that used to do that for those who are incarcerated. I wanted to know if those opportunities currently exist, and then why wouldn't the employment opportunity and information be provided while they're incarcerated? Why would you want to levy this responsibility on the university is my question.
Again, wonderful question. And yes, we already do have resources that have been providing education to currently incarcerated individuals. You mentioned the Goucher Prison Education Partnership that has been offering college courses to individuals. It says about 130 students enroll each year to that program. And so really, again, this isn't to replace anything, but rather to just provide more information for the resources that are already available, to let individuals know when they're being released that these are some opportunities that are available for you. And this legislation isn't even a all-encompassing informational bill. This is for specifically opportunities on our publicly funded institutions to be able to provide job opportunities and information regarding how they can apply and be accepted to the various universities and institutions.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Ivy.
Thank you, sir.
Delegate Metzger is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. My good colleague from the Judiciary, Delegate Watson, pretty much asked my questions, but my thought was that, by the way, you're looking at a person that believes in second chances, third chances, fourth chances, all the way down. My question was that I thought the justice reinvestment had something to do with this, of training these individuals before they came out of prison. And if not, that might need to be revisited.
Right. And so, of course, I'm fully in support of, the efforts that we have made on this issue and others surrounding recidivism and reentry to our society. Again, I just want to underline and really put this in bold, that this is just providing information. It's just telling you what opportunities are out there when you are being released. And so, all the training that takes place within the facility, that's wonderful. But when you're being released, telling you, hey, look, these are some of the opportunities you have. You should call these numbers. You should be a part of this program, so that you can have a direction to go in, rather than the way that it's currently situated. People are released and they're sent back into the community, and they don't really have a clear pathway to change their direction, and they end up falling back into the same old steps that they were making, end up falling back into our system.
That's very good, but it leads me to the follow-up.
Sure.
Why not have, I guess the term would be today would be a life coach of these individuals while they're going through the training and education and process of coming out. I know they have parole officers, and I don't even like that name, but life coach seems to be more of a millennial term. But my thinking is, if they come out of the system, to have a life coach, a motivator, an inspirational person, or somebody that say, hey, I got a problem. Can that be part of this, is what I'm suggesting to you?
Delegate, I would certainly welcome that with open arms. And to take it one step further, if you could be the individual's life coach, I think that it would really be so helpful. But in all seriousness, of course, I would absolutely support providing more resources for that initiative that you're speaking on.
Okay. Anytime you need me, I'm available.
Thank you, sir. I was waiting to get a chuckle from you, but all right.
Chairman of the Public Safety and Administration, Chairman Keith Haynes, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you, Delegate Ivy, for bringing this piece of legislation forth. My question sort of centers around how do we, whether or not getting to the end result is really what we're trying to do, is just provide educational opportunities to individuals who are currently and will likely be formally incarcerated individuals, such that they have a particular career path and reduce the recidivism rates. My question sort of centers around MCE, having dealt with them over the last many years. They do some great work in the correctional enterprises, and you don't want to lose that. My question sort of centers around the Maryland transfer process, where individuals or students who are participating in one of the community colleges, I think there's about 9 out of the 16 in the state,
Yes,
where you can transfer those credits. It's up to 30 credits of an associate's degree into University of Maryland. And like I said, there's 9 out of 16, I think, of those community colleges that participate. My question sort of is a hybrid of what Delegate Watson mentioned. If inmates are eligible to pursue a associate's degree while they are incarcerated, do you know whether or not they would be eligible while pursuing that associate's degree at the community college level while incarcerated? Would they be eligible to participate in the MTAP program? That's the Maryland Transfer Advantage Program, like any other student who's participating in that program, so that once they complete that program, get their associate's degree, they are eligible to transfer those credits into the University of Maryland. It's sort of another way of getting there that sort of gets around perhaps the issue I'm sort of hearing of preferential treatment. I'm just wondering whether that's possible under the legislation that you have proposed.
Well, Delegate Haynes, thank you so much for the question. On the fiscal note, this is actually something that is specifically already a part of this legislation that talks about providing information regarding MTAP to these individuals that are currently incarcerated and on their way out. So again, this is complementary legislation. This is to provide information to individuals who are being released about what resources are out there, what opportunities are already out there, so that they can make that decision for themselves to take their life in the right direction, rather than feeling as if they don't have any other options and they really don't have any other way to turn except back to the decisions that led them to be incarcerated.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate Haynes. Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for the bill sponsor or for the witnesses? Seeing none. We also have written testimony in favor from Dr. Bernard Sandusky with the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. Also favorable written testimony by Grishma, non-UMD, Maryland, Mary PIRG, and then also letter of information by Joanne Bauman with the University System of Maryland. Concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 73. Delegate Ivey, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a great one.
Next, we will hear House Bill 1003, Delegate Learman, States of Emergency, Emergency Procurement and Budget Amendments, Notice and Authorization. Delegate Learman.
Hey, hi everybody, great to be with you. Hi, great to be with you today. I have two bills, both of which are about the pandemic that we're living through. So this first one has to do with increasing transparency during a state of emergency. So, we have learned so much this past year about how to ensure transparency or not, while we are preserving the agility of our executive, our governor, to do his job and someday her job. This bill that I have right now will accomplish the goal of ensuring increased transparency while preserving agility by just creating some key reporting guidelines that only take place during a state of emergency. So the first thing to note is that this bill is just about transparency issues during a declared state of emergency. The bill does three things. One, when authorizing certain emergency procurements during a state of emergency, this bill would require the governor or the authorizing unit head to provide timely notice, what we call 72 hours of notice, to the Legislative Policy Committee, including a copy of the procurement contract, a description of how the funds are to be used, and an explanation of how the procurement will prepare for and address the emergency. Nothing about that they can't do the procurement, nothing about approval, just a heads up. Legislative Policy Committee, we have done this. Two, when suspending a statute or rule or regulation of a state agency or political subdivision during a state of emergency, this bill would also require the governor to provide notice of that suspension to the Legislative Policy Committee and to AELR, just identifying what the statute rule and why they're doing it. Again, they can still do it. The executive can still take the action, just notice that it's being done. And then finally, it codifies current practice existing practice and language that we put in the budget bill every year that basically requires the increase of any federal, special, or higher ed fund appropriation by budget amendment. So if the Board of Public Works deems it essential to maintaining public safety, health, or welfare, then there needs to be a proposed budget amendment to the budget. And also there's some auditing language so that that will be amended slightly. I'm working with DLS on that to have an audit done on procurements at, if the Legislative Policy Committee thinks it's necessary. So probably not on every procurement, just on those that LPC thinks necessary. That's all this bill does. But it will greatly, we've learned a lot over the past year. We spend a lot of money during emergencies, and it's really important that the public and that you, the Appropriations Committee, and that all of the General Assembly understand what we're spending money on. So this bill is just about increasing transparency of the governor's emergency powers and ensuring that we have an informed legislative body and General Assembly and informed local governments and residents so that we're kept knowledgeable about these incredibly important decisions that are being made. So with that, I respectfully request a favorable report on HB 1003. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate Learman, for presenting House Bill 1003. Joining us today from the Health and Government Operations Committee are Speaker Pro Tem Sample Hughes, Delegate Karen Lewis-Young, and Delegate Nick Kipke. We thank them for joining us today. We have favorable testimony from witnesses, two of them. If we could hear from the witness first, and then we'll take questions from members of the committee. First, we have Kaylee Shumitz with the Maryland Center of Economic Policy. Ms. Shumitz, are you here?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just a reminder, 2-minute time limit for testimony, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Vice Chair Chang and members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Callie Shumitz. I'm with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. One of our top priorities of our organization is increasing transparency and public understanding of state fiscal policies. So we think that this is a straightforward, common sense bill, and appreciate Delegate Learman for introducing it. Having transparency is really essential to ensuring that our shared public investments benefit every Marylander, not just the powerful few. And while Maryland already has a number of good different systems for supporting transparency and accountability around state spending, this legislation ensuring timely and meaningful oversight of purchases made during a state of emergency, we think is in line with the goals and the intent of the existing policies. So it certainly makes sense for the executive branch to be able to quickly execute purchases to meet unexpected needs during a state of emergency, and this does not interfere with that. But at the same time, we think having some basic oversight measures in place, as Delegate Learman outlined, is a reasonable way to ensure that the legislature can adequately perform your oversight role for state finances, that you have more information to understand how the state's response to the emergency is progressing, share information with your constituents. As Maryland and other states experienced in 2020, the speed and urgency of large state purchases of essential supplies to respond to an emergency can create opportunities for price gouging, fraud, other challenges, not saying that is the fault of anyone in the state, but that there are people trying to take advantage of these situations. And so having additional oversight can help manage that. And we think that having the audit requirement provides another opportunity to come back and review what happened after the fact, resolve issues, maybe refine best practices for future emergencies. So we would ask for a favorable report on House Bill 1003.
Great, thank you very much. And also we have on our witness list, Vince McAvoy. Vince McAvoy's here.
Vince McAvoy has not entered the waiting room.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Wareheim. We also have a letter of information from the Department of General Services on this bill too. The committee want to hear questions from members of the committee. Delegate Grice is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the first question I have is, do they have to wait 72 hours in order to spend the money, or do they have to report it or disclose it to the legislature within 72 hours?
They have to report it to the LPC after 72 hours. So the actual phrasing is when the governor authorizes an emergency procurement within 72 hours after the earlier of the execution of the contract or the expenditure of funds, the governor shall provide written notice. So they just need to get it to us within 72 hours. So if you've executed a contract, just within 72 hours, send it over to the LPC so we know what you're doing.
Right. Okay. But they can spend the money within 72.
Yes.
Does this provision exist? Does this provision exist anywhere else, anywhere in the country? Because obviously,
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry. I can look it up, but
Oh, it's okay.
I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
The gentlelady from the Health and Government Operations Committee is recognized, Delegate Karen Lewis-Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for inviting HGO to participate on this bill. My question is around the time frame of the one-year OLA audit after the emergency contracts. I'm wondering if that's the correct metric. And I did see OLA's comment about they didn't have the appropriate resources for that time frame, but I don't believe operational limitation should drive policy. I think it should be the other way around. So the question is, did you consider, or are you considering, rather than a one-year time frame, either a dollar amount threshold driving an audit, the end of an emergency, or 1 year, whichever happens first, or perhaps an audit triggered by an action from the Legislative Policy Committee?
Yep, it's a great question, Delegate Lewis-Young, and that is, you're exactly right. So the amendments that we're working on right now with DLS would change this section, because you're right, we want to make sure that the contract has been used, right, has been fulfilled. It's hard to audit a contract that's ongoing, and we want to make sure that the body who's doing the auditing is, that we're auditing the contracts that need to be audited, not the ones that were maybe, tiny and irrelevant. So what we're looking at doing is the last suggestion that you made, to have the LPC determine which contracts, which procurements need to be audited, and to work probably with an outside firm to do those audits as well, so that there's just that it's all very transparent and that we have the resources to do it. So that way we can really focus on the larger procurements that might have been more problematic or run into issues, and not deal with the little inconsequential ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well thought out.
Thanks.
Delegate Beitzel is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Learman, how you doing?
Good.
I just question, just to be sure, is there anything or any way in this, is there anything in this legislation that would overturn, to give this Legislative Policy Committee any authority to overturn a contract or to stop the issuance of an award or anything?
No.
Just basically a
Nothing.
notification.
This is just a notification statute.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Delegate Krim is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So I'm kind of reading the fiscal note as we're here having the hearing here. So could you explain to me how this affects the Board of Public Works? Does it?
Well, it's just if there is it's just having to do with the budget amendments. So if the Board of Public Works is going to, the very last section of the bill, 7214, is about if the Board of Public Works declares that a budget amendment is essential to maintaining public safety, health, or welfare, including the protecting environment or economic welfare of the state, then the budget amendment, there needs to be a budget amendment in term to clarify the changes to the budget and the reductions in the budget. And that's pretty standard. I mean, I think, every year in our budget bill, we do have language that there needs to be a budget amendment in order to increase what we've, allocated in the budget, just so that there's clarity and around what is happening and there can be a review. So that codifies it.
So did I read in here that the BPW has to be notified within 45 days of emergency procurement? Was that in here? And again,
That's not in the statute, in the bill itself.
Okay.
Already,
Right.
that is probably already existing law.
I think that is existing.
Yeah.
I think that is existing.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if there's any way we could streamline that and have the BPW and LPC notified at the same time. So, we're not doing
To double duty. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we can look into. I'm happy to, I think we wanted to create the least onerous reporting requirements while also having some reporting requirements because we have none right now.
Right.
So, but I'm certainly happy to work with the committee on, further clarification around notifying the Board of Public Works.
Okay.
The Minority Leader, Delegate Nick Kipke, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I'm just, I appreciate the intent of the legislation. I'm curious, my question is, do you have any idea of how many of these types of purchases were made during the last, what we've experienced over the last year? As a member of LPC, we get communications on a regular basis, and oftentimes I think to myself, we're not in a position to really understand if this is good, bad, or indifferent. And I'm just curious, are we going to receive a ton of different procurement? I mean, what benefit will we receive from this? I mean, there's already, there's a lot of opportunity already for transparency if there's scandals or whatever. I mean, I'm just curious the volume and what benefit would come of this.
Great question. So I think the volume will depend on the state of emergency, right? And this is only going to be in effect when a declared state of emergency. So not very often, one would hope, right? And so in the past year, Governor Hogan has authorized almost $1.5 billion in emergency contracts and procurements. So, and the General Assembly, and I think, often found out about procurements through press releases or arrival of budget amendments that had already been signed by the governor, because there's no process in place right now for him to notify us in any other way. So this provides a process for the governor and the governor's team to make sure that it is notifying, our co-equal branch of government about what is going on in a very timely fashion. Right now, that process just doesn't exist. And, especially during states of emergency, it's important for certain protocols to exist because there's so much going on. So if we have a protocol in place already, then it'll just be another box to check off. Okay, we've signed on the dotted line, and now we're going to send this over to the LPC so they see what we've done too. And they'll just be it'll be much more regimented and much more clear. I can't say how many of those you'll get or how many of those the LPC would get because every state of emergency is different and requires different levels of contracting. This state of emergency required quite a bit of emergency procurements because of, safety needs and PPE and whatnot. But I think it is important that the General Assembly have, even if not every contract is equally important, that they have some idea of what is going on.
So do you have any idea what the volume was over the last year? How many of these contracts? You mentioned a dollar amount, but I wonder if, was it 10, 1,000, 2,000?
No, I don't know I don't know the actual number of contracts because they weren't all shared. So we don't actually know every contract that was approved. So, I mean, it's right. So I don't know because the General Assembly hasn't received that information to me.
Okay, it's a matter of public record. So if you were to request it, I think you could find.
Oh yeah, no, I probably could, but that's, I'm just that's why it's important, I think, to have this. I just know the dollar amount because of the budgeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee or Health and Government Operations? Yes, Madam Speaker Pro Tem Sample Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing us to be here today. Delegate Learman, thank you for the bill. And I like the fact that you referenced that we learned a lot of procurement that was done through the media. Namely, I'll speak to the point of 60 Minutes. I think I learned about the PPEs and all those types of things that were purchased, and I just kind of just zeroed in on 60 Minutes television at that moment. My question is, how did you arrive at the 72 hours versus another number in particular? And if you have answered that, my apologies, but I was just curious why that number. Is that something that you find applicable in some other policy that has been used in the past or to that nature? If you can answer that, please.
Sure. We, in thinking through the amount of time that it would take for, the governor's team to, sign off on the contract, put together a paragraph explaining what it is. I felt like in an emergency situation, maybe an overnight or the next day would be too quickly just because of competing needs. So, 72 hours, it's a weekend. If you sign something on a Friday, it's by Monday, I think it seemed like a reasonably quick amount of time, but also not so fast that it would burden the governor's team, so that it would be difficult to keep up with. Just trying to strike a happy medium.
Sure, thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions for House Bill 1003? Thank you very much to Health and Government Operations Committee members for joining us today, and that concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 1003. We will now move on to House Bill 922, sponsored by Delegate Learman, State Retirement and Pension Systems COVID-19 related death benefits clarification. Delegate Learman, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Appropriations Committee members. Great to be with you today. I'm Brooke Learman, and I'm bringing this bill on behalf of the Joint Committee on Pensions. This is a bill that would ensure that we as a state fulfill our promise to our state employees who've served on the front lines throughout the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I just want to make it clear that this bill does not confer any new benefits or rights. It simply creates a process. It's a clear process for people to be able to access benefits that they should already have. This, as background, and cited in our December 9th Joint Committee on Pension decision document, existing law already provides a benefit for line of duty death of a member of one of the several systems. So if an employee dies or is killed in the performance of duty, their surviving family members can receive a benefit or an allowance of 2/3 of the member's average final compensation. So at that meeting in December, the Joint Committee voted to recommend legislation to clarify that line of duty death benefits are eligible to be received in the event that a state worker who's part of the system dies from COVID. And this legislation comes from that vote. So HB 922 clarifies that a system member's death that was caused or contributed to by COVID-19 can be eligible for a line of duty death benefit, provided that they reported to the member's usual work location or to an alternative work location that is not the member's home. So this is not people who are working from home. That they also contracted COVID-19 within 14 days of reporting to that work location, subject to, there has to be some documentation to show that, and that the death occurred on or after March 5th, 2020, and before July 1, 2022, so next July. The bill sunsets on next year in 2022, and then requires a number of reporting requirements to sort of look back on any benefits awarded and number of applications that have been denied and the aggregate summary of reasons that we've denied an application. So this just lays out how to apply, who is eligible for COVID-19 death benefits, and how and what the department will do to determine that eligibility. It just clarifies it. So hopefully it will provide some comfort and ease for people whose loved ones were state employees and have died due to COVID-19 that they contracted at work. With that, I respectfully request a favorable report on HB 922.
Thank you very much, Delegate Learman. And here to provide favorable oral testimony on this bill is Lance Kilpatrick, AFSCME Council 3. Mr. Kirkpatrick, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Lance Kilpatrick. I'm the Legislative and Political Director of AFSCME Council 3, representing 30,000 state and higher education employees here in Maryland. You all have my written testimony, so I'm going to keep this brief. Sadly, state employees by the thousands have contracted COVID-19, and AFSCME is aware of 11 deaths from COVID to date, one of which we actually didn't even learn until yesterday's DBM personnel hearing. So by our count, that makes it 2 in the Division of Corrections, 5 in the Department of Health, 3 in the Department of Transportation, and at least 1 within our public university system. Frontline employees across Maryland have fearlessly continued reporting to work despite numerous obstacles to overcome, including shortages of PPE, information, protocols, and planning. But because of the work of frontline employees, we have limited community transmission out of our public congregate care facilities. Meanwhile, we need the committee to know that there are real mental and physical health concerns that have come because of so much overtime being mandated in our 24/7 facilities. We have situations where our members are being required to consistently work 16-hour shifts. We want to applaud the Joint Committee on Pensions for this legislative undertaking and encourage the committee to continue its vigilance. The long-term care effects of COVID-19 are still being discovered, and it's highly likely that state disability benefits will need to be addressed before we can put this viral nightmare behind us. We thank you and strongly urge a favorable report of HB 922.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kilpatrick. And to the committee, we also have Ms. Ann Gothrop and also Mr. Dean Kenderdine with the State Retirement Agency, who are here to answer any questions that the committee may have. This time, questions from the committee will be recognized. Delegate Greist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a provision in this bill that will do like a contact tracing just to make sure that they had actually contracted this virus while they were on the job?
So there are requirements for proving that, or for demonstrating, it's not proving, it's the wrong word, but for demonstrating how that you did get it on the job. So there isn't a requirement for contract tracing per se, but there are requirements for demonstrating that it was contracted on the job.
So what are those parameters? I mean, somehow you have to have some sort of proof that it actually happened. And I think it'd be very difficult to do that. Even during those times, those months that we've had where the state was basically locked down. Even then it was very difficult to show where they've actually contracted this disease. And certainly and I appreciate you bringing the bill and it's, obviously this has been devastating for a lot of people, a lot of families. But I also want to do what's fair as well for the residents of the state and the taxpayers to make sure that, we're not going to provide an added benefit when it may not necessarily be due, because there's a lot of folks out there that have had the disease and who passed away, but this benefit's not available to them or their family as well. And probably for the same reasons that I'm asking those questions about where they've actually contracted the disease.
Yep. So what we've put in the bill is that, when determining eligibility, and ultimately, right, the state SRPS is determining eligibility. But when determining eligibility for this death penalty, the board shall accept the death of a member if the member reported to the member's usual work, like I said, or to an alternative work location that isn't the member's home, and the member then contracted COVID-19 within 14 days of being at work and died, and COVID was the cause of death or contributed to the cause of death, and that has to be documented. So we don't have the robust contract tracing available in this state that would be, I think, required to, if we wanted to make that a requirement. It just doesn't exist right now to the level that perhaps, other countries have it. So to do that would really make it incredibly onerous for a state employee to demonstrate that this is where they got it.
I don't know. I would argue that point that you have a very robust contact tracing. In fact, someone was, I overheard a conversation with a family member, and they were trying to get off the phone, but these folks wouldn't let them. They were on the phone for.
Well, I think it's so dependent.
Very intrusive questions.
Really dependent on. It's really dependent on people picking up the phone and answering, right?
Right. Sure.
So it can be really challenging. Just to give you an idea, though, only 10 people in the past year have actually said that. Only 10 state employees have actually said that this is would have claimed this. So, we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of state employees, thankfully.
Well, I'll ask a similar question that I did on your last bill. Are there any other plans out there that provide the same benefit that you're?
Yes, other states are looking at this as well. And I can't tell you every state that is. Ann might have, Ann or Dean might be more up to date on what other states plans are thinking about, but we did discuss this at the joint hearing and the committee of the joint, and we were talking about that other states were looking at this too.
Thank
you. Delegate, I can answer that. 2 states right now have passed that bill. New Jersey has a 14-day waiting requirement like we do, and New York has it, and they have a 45-day waiting requirement. And also to piggyback on what Delegate Learman said, about right now, we've only been notified of 10 people. Within that group of 10 that I've looked up, only 2 would qualify for this benefit because they don't have the family members in place that would be eligible to receive it. So it's exactly what Delegate Learman said. This is not opening the door to hundreds coming in, because of the ones that are coming in, you still even have to qualify to have family members in place that would be eligible for this benefit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galthrop. Delegate Mangione.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Learman. I guess my only question, because I'm not too familiar with how the, I guess, line of duty benefit works, but is there any other type of disease or virus or I guess health issue that is currently included in how it already is written, and where there is a benefit similar to this, like the flu, for example? Is that not included in an in-line duty death benefit?
So yes, there are. So if you die at work, which is awful, if you were to die at work because of work-related activities, the line of duty death benefit kicks in. If you have people, like Ms. Galthrop said, who are eligible to receive your benefits. There are not, we are, because of the nature of COVID-19 and because of its long gestation period, 2 weeks can go by until you actually contracted and things like that. And because we decided as a joint committee that it was important to put in specific parameters on how the board would determine who would be eligible, to provide clarity to the board and to provide clarity to our state employees. So that they know what's available and whether they, just reading the plain language, whether they could potentially, their loved ones who died would potentially qualify. I might leave to Ms. Galthrop if there's further information that you'd like on, if you, for other people who die from different diseases. But if you die because of something that at work or because of a work-related activity, then you are, and you're in the correct system, and then you do have the line of duty death benefits, you're eligible for them.
I appreciate your answer. I just wasn't too terribly familiar with it. And I am, of course, really sorry to hear about those state employees that did pass. So thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for House Bill 922? Seeing none. In our packets, we also have favorable written testimony from Samantha Zerling. She's with the Maryland State Education Association. Also favorable testimony from Angelo Consoli with OP Lodge 89 and Maryland State Lodge. and also favorable written testimony from Jenna Mansoni with the Maryland Troopers Association. This concludes the hearing for House Bill 922. Committee will now hear from Delegate Erican, House Bill 929, Teachers Pension Systems, Vested Allowance Break-in Service. Delegate Erican, welcome to the committee. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is my first time in the Appropriations Committee, so I just want to let everybody know, go easy on me. This is a new topic for me. I'm here today in strong support of HB 292. My constituent, Mr. Albright, has been a valued teacher in the state of Maryland for many, many years. And currently he has been denied his right to his retirement benefits because he's still working. Although he has retired, he is of age to retire, and now he is working, in his retirement in another job. He works for Harford County Community College part-time and full-time for Baltimore City Schools. Both of them are in the state pension system, as you know. So he's been told that in order for him to draw his benefits, that he has to quit all of these jobs so that he can actually collect his benefits. And that he was told that it was like an in-service distribution, which it's not, obviously. And he's not paying into the system anymore. He's not eligible to pay into it on either of the jobs that he's currently in. I don't think there's very many people that are eligible, would if this passed, would be eligible under here. But it is a small group of people who I think are rightfully being denied access to their monies that they have stored away for this time in their life. So I will do my best to answer any questions. I know that we have Ms. Gothrop is here as well still, and she will hopefully be able to answer any of the nitty-gritty details about what this bill will do. But yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here with you all today.
Wonderful. We have testimony from Mr. Dennis Albright. Mr. Albright, thank you for being here.
I don't know if he could make it. He did tell me that he may have to be in a class teaching during the time, so he may not be able to be on.
He has not entered the waiting room.
Thank you, Ms. Wareham. We also do have written testimony from Mr. Albright. And also we have Ms. Ann Gothrop, who is from the State Retirement Agency, who is joining us for any questions. Members of the Appropriations Committee, are there any questions for the bill sponsor, Delegate Arakan? The Madam Vice Chair of the Pensions Subcommittee, Delegate Susie Proctor.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if I have a question for the sponsor of the bill. Maybe this is for Ms. Gothrop. I have not heard of this situation like this before. Maybe you could tell us what circumstances this would happen.
Delegate, are you okay if I answer that? Would you mind? So Delegate Proctor, what precipitated this is if you are employed by a participating employer in the plan, then, and that can be any participating employer, you cannot draw a pension and be employed by a participating employer. The language in the law does not state that, well, you have to be employed by a participating employer and be an active member in the plan. It just says you have to be employed, you can't be employed by a participating employer. It doesn't place restrictions, or in this case, for this gentleman, it doesn't give him any leeway. So he's not in any system of any state system right now. He's part-time with Harford County, which doesn't allow him to participate. And I believe he's full-time with Baltimore City, and he's actually in the Baltimore City plan. So he can't be in our plan also for that job. So he's been eligible to receive a benefit. He became eligible when he turned 62. But he can't get it because he is employed by these individuals or by these employers. So this bill will say, you are of normal retirement age, you are eligible to receive a benefit for this individual. And I believe right now we only know of this, for the purposes of this bill, I believe it would only be for Mr. Albright. But there could be others out there who would come in and say, I'm in a similar situation and I would like to begin drawing my benefit. This bill allows him to draw his benefit without any penalties, without any IRS penalties, And we are allowed to do this because the IRS says once you reach normal retirement age, then you can have a distribution like this man is asking for.
Madam Chairwoman, if you could unmute yourself, Chairwoman of Pensions.
Sorry, I didn't know it. We also have similar laws, I guess, with teachers where you have to be retired for a certain period of time and have to have a special waiver to come back.
So that's a great point that you're bringing this up, because if this man had actually retired and then gone to work for these individuals, he wouldn't be subject to any earnings limit, because as teachers are, he's going back to work for a different employer from which he retired. Now, what this bill is allowing him to do that teachers can't do is to waive the 45-day requirement, and that is because he is at normal retirement age right now. So that's the distinction between this individual and the reemployment provisions addressing the teacher's pension system and other reemployment provisions throughout the other several systems.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Chairwoman of the Pension Subcommittee for the questions. The gentleman from Baltimore County is recognized, Delegate Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Delegate, I appreciate this bill so very much. I had a very similar situation a few months ago where I had a school teacher who was my constituent who taught in Montgomery County, and he wanted to retire, and he was teaching at another school. So what they made him do was actually quit the job, and he had, I think if my memory serves me correctly, he had to quit for like 2 weeks, and that started the process all over again. So he was able to get his retirement. So I think this is a good opportunity to tweak what we've got out. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Delegate.
Delegate Carol Krim is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So Delegate Eric may have said this, Ann, but what's the position of the retirement system on this bill?
We're not taking any position on the bill because it is a plan design issue. And as you know, Delegate Krim, the law does not allow us to take a position on plan design. I'm here just to answer questions, but I also want to point out that the delegate's office and the cross-file with Senator Jennings, both offices work closely with our agency on the drafting of this bill to make sure that it would be something that wouldn't jeopardize our tax qualified status or any other issues that we might have with the IRS. So I really appreciate that opportunity to work with their offices.
But you do not know how many people this may affect.
I do. The way this bill is drafted, this bill will only impact the delegate's constituent. However, that's not to say somewhere out there in the big land of retirees, there aren't others.
Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee regarding House Bill 929? Seeing none, thank you very much, Delegate Arikin, for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
That concludes the hearing for House Bill 929. Next, the committee will now hear House Bill 791 by our fellow Appropriations Committee member, Delegate Patrick Young. It's for military service credit eligibility. Delegate Young, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, for the record, I'm Delegate Pat Young, and happy to introduce you reintroduce you HB 791 military service credit eligibility. This is a bill that's become a perpetual one that I've been putting in. And some of you will remember this who've served in the committee for a while. The bill would allow a member or vested former member of the state police retirement system, law enforcement officers pension system, or correctional officers retirement system to earn military service credit toward their retirement pension. So as a refresher and get into the meat of it, we know that the Department of Health and the Department of Corrections has the highest vacancy rate across all of the agencies in the state of Maryland. Our attempt here with this piece of legislation has always been to add another tool to recruit and find adequate potential correctional officers that can pass the background check, that have already served and potentially, you would imagine, have a record that could allow them to then serve in as a Maryland correctional officer and help alleviate the vacancies that we have across the board. I agree with the mantra of not, it takes more than 1 year to get a good bill passed. Maybe this will be the year for this one. I understand, as most bills, that this has a fiscal note. I'll say that every year we've sort of adjusted and taken up issues. I think in the first round of this bill, there was concern related to whether or not you could double dip with your time in the military towards another system. We've shored that up in the bill. There was concern about how much it could potentially cost related to current employees that might benefit from the program and then retire early, as opposed to trying to recruit or attract new members to join. This is the first time, I think, in the fiscal note that it mentions and identifies potential members currently in the system that could potentially benefit from this, which I'm happy to discuss with the subcommittee and as well as the department about ways to lower the fiscal note and add another tool to the department's box to try and recruit and shore up this issue related to vacancies within the department. So with that, happy to take any questions. And I believe I also have one or two folks here in support of the bill as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Young, for presenting this bill. Providing oral testimony in favor of the bill is Ms. Diana Bergman. Ms. Bergman, if you could provide testimony in 2-minute time limit, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Diana Bergman, and I just want to make everybody aware that you're missing out on a lot of very potential, dedicated career servicemen when they get to retire early. My husband will be retiring at the early age of 43, and if you want to keep him here in Maryland, he already comes with experience. He comes with hands-on training. If you're looking at law enforcement, we also have mechanics that come with hands-on experience, getting their hours, service, and training. And they provide that opportunity to be able to pass those background checks that cost a lot of money. The background checks usually are good for 5 years, and we encourage our active duty service members to make sure that is up to date right before they discharge honorably from serving. And you want to keep our military retirees in Maryland to stay here. So I encourage this to pass. Hopefully this is the year for it. It could bring a lot of qualified candidates. At the NSA, we have the National Cryptology School. It's a College of Language and Area Studies. And it's what we call a purple installation. That means all active duty service branches work together, and they bring a lot to the table, a lot of leadership skills. And it'll benefit the state of Maryland as a whole in the long run. So thank you for your time, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bergman, for your testimony. We also have joining us for any questions, Ms. Ann Gothrop with the State Retirement Agency, and providing testimony, written testimony, is Angelo Consoli with the FOP Lodge 89 and Maryland State Lodge, and also favorable written testimony from Jason Spiegel. At this time, the committee will take questions. The gentlelady from Howard, representing Howard and Carroll counties, recognized. Delegate Trent Kittleman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Delegate Young. Your explanation of the bill really appealed to me. I agree. We really have difficulty finding enough people in any phase of corrections. Baltimore City does too, but they can worry about that. So my question is two questions. One is, how do you, or have you gotten as far as to think about how this is going to be advertised and marketed to attract the people you are interested in? And the second one is, could you just explain the fiscal note? There were so many different dollar numbers in there. I wasn't sure what the bottom line was. Thank you.
Sure. And honestly, to your first question, but Ms. Gothrop, I think if you're here too to explain the fiscal impact, I mean, I'd be happy to talk about the fiscal note, but if you're here and you're comfortable kind of giving what your perspective is on what this could potentially affect as written, in terms of fiscal impact.
Ms. Gothrop?
We're not, that's okay.
We can
No,
follow up.
Sure. In the fiscal note, it has a couple different numbers in there, but there's depending on where someone is in their in terms of their career with the departments that are affected by this, there are about 800 and some, close to 900 folks that could potentially benefit. And if they left early, could have a impact of individually each one of them, if all of them at one time took advantage of this, anywhere from 300,000 to $1 million based on what their benefit is. That I'd also like to throw it back to her if she is available, or I can answer that question more specifically after or offline, because I don't want to give you the wrong numbers, but they threw out individually, everyone wants to take it that's currently there now.
And I was just going to say that it sounds to me like this is an expense that would be justified if the pins are there and we need to hire.
In terms of overtime, I would think that, it does end up making more sense. And I think that because this is one of the first times that I've seen an actual number of folks that are currently in the system that could benefit, a way of narrowing it so that it's really used as a recruitment tool rather than a way to, just retire early, but at the same time, making sure that folks that have done their time are also being recognized for their service as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our witness, Ms. Diana Bergman, did you want to address the question?
Yes, I wanted to, Delegate Gilman, our active duty service members on Fort Meade, we have a building called the ACS, which we provide a lot of supports. And our active duty members, we also work and encourage with them their last year as they're transitioning out of retirement, to work with the local community to help them reestablish them transition from military life to the civilian life. So we have active recruiters that work with community members around the installation to help accommodate that regarding recruitment and creating that relationship.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you very much, Ms. Bergen. Delegate Krim is recognized for question.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So in the interest of trying to move this along, I'm just going to offer a suggestion. Is there any way to phase this in over a period of time, or is it 5 years or nothing? That's my question.
Sure. Well, I think the 5 years is just kind of going off of what's already offered in other areas. Even the legislature now offers 3 years of military service towards the pension. I think in the executive branch, it offers 5 years. So we've picked 5 years to stay consistent, but I'm open to discussion about potential phase-in, something that would move things forward and to eventually get to that 5-year point.
Thank you. The chairwoman of the pension subcommittee, Delegate Proctor.
Actually, I think my question was answered.
Offers 5 years, so we picked 5 years to stay consistent, but I'm open to
Ms. Gothrop, if you can mute yourself, we got it. Thank you.
Yes, I'm thinking along the same lines as Delegate Krim. So, I think that's something to look at.
Delegate Proctor.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Gothrop, thank you for joining us back. Did you want to answer any questions that were addressed? Ms. Gothrop, you're muted.
Yes, I'm thinking along the same lines as Delegate Krim. So, I think that's something to look at. Delegate Proctor. Thank you.
Ms. Gothrop, I think you have the YouTube playing in the background.
I'm trying to get it off. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, tell you what, if you could work on that, we'll take a question from Delegate Beitzel.
Yes,
Okay, Delegate Beitzel.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Young, could you give a specific example? Because I'm a little bit confused that the bill allows a member of a vested former member of the state police retirement system, law enforcement officers pension system, or correctional officers retirement system to earn military credit, even if that member or former member receives service credit for the same military service under another retirement system. It says, however, a member may not receive military service credit from the state more than once. So what kind of a system, in other words, if you retired from the state police and you're already receiving retirement from that system, what job would they go take that they could get this service credit?
So if I would say in a scenario related that if they're already receiving a pension from the state police, but they weren't receiving, if they had already received service credit towards a pension system with the state, like if they were the executive branch and they got 5 years and worked for the correctional officers and then try to get another 5 years towards their pension, that would be the double that you would not,
Whammy.
that would not be allowed.
So who do you envision using this? I mean, I think the way you presented the bill, you were looking to get more people to work for corrections or the state police. So what retirement system would they come from where they might have, where they did receive service credit to be able to participate and get the credit here?
Yeah, that was one example. In other, the executive branch offers something. I know that the local government does. We included, the original bill just had corrections, and we included the other folks after engaging with the law enforcement community, and same issues in terms of recruitment and passing background checks, with the intent of mainly the biggest piece for us is recognizing and seeing the vacancy every year in corrections, but also recognizing there's an issue with finding qualified folks in other systems. So there is a scenario that we needed to make sure that we shored up, and this, I think we did this 2 or 3 years ago, where it created a system where you could use it in multiple systems. So we added the language to make sure that it couldn't be, even if you are receiving it or have received it, to clarify that you can't receive it somewhere else. Does that make sense? Yeah. And we can talk offline about it too, if you'd like to.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. All right. Yeah. I mean, it's a, if they're veterans, obviously you're on the Veterans Caucus and did a good job this morning. So I support any of those issues that help veterans, but I just wanted a kind of example of how it would work. Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Grawthrop, we'll go back to you to see if you would like to add any additional comments to the questions that were presented.
So with regard to the fiscal note, I'm sorry, Delegate Kittleman, you wanted to know what how the cost is generated from this? Was that your question?
I just was curious as to find out if there was a firmer fiscal note, because there were a lot of numbers in there, but Delegate Young sort of explained, I think, to my satisfaction, why that's so.
And to be fair too, the fiscal note for this did not have a specific chart saying what it would cost year to year, but because of the fact that it's so open-ended on who would take it, who wouldn't, what the impact would be based on the individual and based on the retirement program. So I offered it to you to clarify.
Right. We have no way of knowing how many people. So when I responded for the fiscal note, I couldn't give them a certain number of people. The cost is kind of vague right now. I mean, there is a cost, and this will speak also to Delegate Beitzel's question as to what that provision meant. There's a prohibition in there that you cannot be receiving military credit from there's 7 state systems, and you can't be receiving military credit and getting a benefit from that in the employees plan and then apply for it also in the correctionals or any of the other plans, because that benefit, those 5 years are paid, the employer and employee costs are paid by the state. It's a very generous benefit for our veterans. It's a nice benefit. So to Delegate Beitzel's question, who you're talking about are retired military people from other systems outside of the state who would come in and are already getting a benefit from that, but the state isn't already paying for it. So the cost is actually, because we don't know how many people that would be coming in, we can't speak to exactly how much it would cost. I couldn't tell your fiscal note right of that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gawthrop. Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for House Bill 791? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 791. Next, the committee will now move to House Bill 741, which is an administrative bill. It's the Maryland Environmental Services Officers Board of Directors and Responsibilities alterations. We have Mr. Kiefer Mitchell, Aaron Chase, and also Mr. Andrew Casili with the Governor's Office that will be presenting this bill. Please proceed when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kiefer Mitchell. I'm Chief Legislative Officer for Governor Hogan. I'll be very brief on House Bill 741 and then turn it to my colleagues, Aaron Chase and Delegate Andrew Casili. I'm here on behalf of the Governor for House Bill 741, the Maryland Environmental Services Officers Board of Directors and Responsibilities bill. Since taking office, the governor has pushed to restore integrity and accountability to our state government. Governor Hogan is committed to bringing much needed systemic reforms to MES. As issues with MES came to light, the governor took immediate steps to institute a series of reforms. He spoke with the new director, Dr. Charles Glass, about taking immediate action, which included a comprehensive top to bottom review of the agency. The governor appointed retired federal judge Frederick Smolkin to serve as the board secretary in order to bring immediate accountability and oversight. In August of 2020, he directed the Department of Budget and Management to launch and conduct a thorough audit, which remains ongoing. He also, this audit was in addition to the one that MES conducted, which resulted in MES making changes to the expense reimbursement policy, among other immediate changes. In September of 2020, the governor sent a letter to the presiding officers and pledged to work with the legislature on a bipartisan reforms to the governing structure and oversight. Mr. Vice Chair, I just wanted to say that Governor believes that all Marylanders deserve and expect all of their state government agencies and entities to be representing their interests fairly and honestly. Thank you for your time. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Aaron Chase, who can walk you through the bill.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Chang and members of the House Appropriations Committee. My name is Aaron Chase with the Governor's Legislative Office. I'm here today to walk you through House Bill 741, Maryland Environmental Service Officers, Boards of Directors, and Responsibilities alterations, and specifically the structural changes to the officers and Board of Directors that we are proposing. The major change that we make to the officers of the service in House Bill 741 is that we remove the Deputy Director as an officer of MES, and therefore also as a member of the Board of Directors. The bill does permit the board to appoint a deputy director if they so choose, but there's no requirement that MES must have a deputy director. Regardless of if one is appointed, the deputy director does not serve as a member of the board. The bill also expands the size of the board of directors to allow for a more diverse set of views. Our bill adds both the secretary of DPM and the state treasurer to the board, as well as an ethics expert and a private sector seat that is reserved for an individual with water or wastewater management that specifically has financial management expertise. Our bill does allow the director of MES to remain a member of the board, but only in a non-voting role. Given that the director is the head of the service, we believe they should be permitted to be an active participant in the board's discussions to ensure that the operational views of the service are represented. This means that the board of directors will increase from 9 members to 12, but only 11 members will have voting powers. With regards to appointments, House Bill 741 requires Senate advice and consent for all board appointees. Additionally, our bill will permit the governor to reappoint his recent board appointees, including retired federal judge Smolkin. House Bill 741 also institutes staggered terms and term limits. The implementation of these provisions will bring new perspectives to the board on a regular basis and allow for healthy, regular rates of turnover. In closing, we have a duty to ensure that our state agencies, whether part of the executive branch or quasi-public, provide Marylanders with superior services as prescribed in their statutes. As was previously stated, the Hogan administration remains fully committed to restoring and bringing transparency and good government reforms to all entities in the administration. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to working with you on House Bill 741. And at this time, I will turn it over to Andrew Casserly to discuss the second part of the bill.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Chang and esteemed committee members. For the record, Andrew Casserly, advisor to the governor in support of House Bill 741. While Aaron explained the first objective of this legislation in making structural changes to the board at MES, the second objective is to ensure a number of accountability and transparency measures will be included. I'll just go through a couple of those measures. First, MES will be required to adopt policies relating to expense reimbursements, travel, severance, and bonuses for employees and board members. Secondly, the board will conduct an annual performance evaluation of the director. In addition, the criteria and procedures for this evaluation must be posted on the MES website. MES will implement a conflict of interest policy for all board members, and every 3 years, an independent assessment of board functions and operations will be required and must be posted on the website. This audit will investigate any misallocated funds or unauthorized spending. A copy of the audit will be submitted to the governor, the legislature, Department of Budget Management, and posted on the MES website. This bill will increase the current required ethics and financial disclosure process from limited disclosures to full disclosures for board members. And lastly, the legislation requires the submission of a detailed budget to DBM that includes sources for all revenue. We are confident the combination of structural accountability and transparency measures within this bill will allow Maryland Department of Environment to move forward under the new leadership in an efficient, effective, and conscientious manner while serving the needs of our state. We humbly ask for your favorable report for House Bill 741. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Casserly, Ms. Chase, and also Mr. Mitchell for presenting House Bill 741. The committee will now take questions. The gentleman who is the chairman of the Transportation Environment Committee, Delegate Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to two former delegates and to Ms. Chase. First of all, I woke up this morning hearing the news that the governor was going to be testifying before a legislative panel, and I got very excited. I'm happy to see you too, and at least he's testifying about transportation where he decided to go testify. Appreciate the bill. I guess this is more of an isn't that so question, but just for my colleagues' benefit, we've been in close communication. You've also talked to Senator McCray on that side. I think their subcommittee's already moved forward a bill, and we will hopefully move forward a bill later this week that incorporates, I think, every provision that you just referenced with a few minor tweaks. So hopefully you'll look favorably on that bill when it gets before you all for your judgment. And again, that's more of an isn't that so than a specific question.
Thank you, Delegate. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you and the Senator in making sure that we have all the pieces in place on this.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for House Bill 741? Delegate Beitzel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Former Delegate Casserly.
Yes, sir.
I maybe a suggestion more than a question. One of the things with MES is in the way they bill for services, they have an overhead factor. So if, say, for instance, if someone's providing wastewater treatment to Rocky Gap or some town or DNR, this just used for example, they charge $50 an hour. They add on an overhead factor of, I think at one time, I can't remember exactly, but the factor was like approaching 100% of what it was. It was not. So I wonder if I could just ask that while you're looking at all these things, because with these costs and the things that were happening here with the administration before and those payouts, that all went into that overhead. And so the services they were providing to agencies like DNR and other state agencies and municipalities were paying for that in their overhead factor. So I wonder if you could just take a look at that while you're doing these things. So,
Delegate, I appreciate the suggestion, and I would offer that Delegate Corman is also a member of the Star Commission that was recently formed to look at all the quasi private agencies out there. And so this would be useful information, I think, to bring forward to that committee as well, to check it, how many other agencies follow the same process. And if not, it certainly would be something to look into.
all right, thank you. Thank you,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for House Bill 741? Seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you to the Governor's Office for being here. That concludes the bill, House Bill 741. We will now move on to House Bill 1238, which is sponsored by the General Lady of the Appropriations Committee, Delegate Kathy Forbes. It is for the Maryland 529 program, Board Authority and State Contributions Alterations. Delegate Forbes, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Appropriations Committee. I appreciate this opportunity to present to you HB 1238, a bill that will alter the state contribution plan for the Maryland 529 programs. I'm going to lay a little bit of groundwork so you understand what this bill affects and what it doesn't affect. In Maryland, the Maryland Board 529 Board operates Maryland 529, a college savings plans. Most states across the country have these plans, or at least one of these plans, and they take their name from Section 529 of the federal tax code that created this opportunity. These accounts are typically opened by parents or grandparents, but can actually be opened by anyone. And they offer a way to save for college. They encourage you to invest regularly, and you can save and your earnings grow tax deferred. So, and if you take the money out for a qualified educational expense, you don't pay any taxes on those gains you've made through the years. In Maryland, we also offer the opportunity to deduct up to $2,500 in contributions per beneficiary to the account holder on their Maryland taxes each year. Within our Maryland 529 program, we offer two programs: the prepaid college trust, which is essentially buying college tuition at today's rates and using it later, and the college investment plan, which is a more traditional investment plan and managed by T. Rowe Price. After these programs were established in our state, we found our more affluent families were flocking to them. They understood the benefits of the program, they appreciated the tax deferred savings, and they appreciated the state tax credits. But participation among our families with less means was sorely lacking. So part of the College Affordability Act of 2016 created the Save for College State Contribution Program. This is a means-tested program that provides a state contribution to investments made in a 529 plan. So the intent of Save for College was to encourage low and middle income families to get over that hurdle and open a 529 and start saving for college. After making the investment, an account holder applies to the Save for College program. They're vetted, and if they meet the eligibility requirements of income eligibility, they receive a state funded contribution right into their 529 plans. Unfortunately, a number of people, and it's a growing number of people, found a loophole in the original law that created the Save for College program, and they've abused the program by opening multiple accounts for their children, and these families and these beneficiaries then qualified for multiple contributions, and there was nothing illegal about it. Last year in our committee, we heard DLS testimony about a family that had opened 49 accounts for each of their 4 children, and in 1 year took away $100,000 in Save for College program match or contributions. We began to address this as a legislature in the 2020 BRFA, and we included language that limited to the number of state contributions to each beneficiary to 2. Then over the interim, the changes in HB 1238 came out of an interim work group that was legislators. Delegate Solomon served on it with me, Senators Elfreth, Zucker, and Klossmeyer, Aaron Layton, the superstar who runs Maryland 529, Robin McKinney from Cash Campaign for Maryland, Ian Klein from DLS, and Megan Schultz from the Treasurer's Office. And we all put our heads together to look how we could keep this good idea, but end the abuse. And so the proposed changes in this bill only affect the Save for College program, not investments in 529 that are made by individuals. So it's just the state contributions that are. And so HB 1238 will impose a lifetime limit of $9,000 in state contributions to each account holder, regardless of how many accounts they have opened. Maryland 529 estimates this will save taxpayers about $1.2 million a year. This bill also mandates that the beneficiary receiving the state contribution must be under 26 years of age during the year they apply for the state contribution. This was included to preserve the intent of encouraging long-term saving for college. And this change is estimated to save about $1.5 million. Current eligibility for the Save for College program is determined by the account holder's Maryland taxable income. HB 1238 will change that, and eligibility will be determined by the account holder's Maryland adjusted gross income. Your adjusted gross income, your AGI, is more reflective of what you really earn because it's your income before you take all the deductions that you might be eligible for. So we will make sure we are targeting the most needy among us. Finally, this bill will require the account holder to be a Maryland resident to qualify for the state contribution. There was already a requirement that the beneficiary was a Maryland resident, but the account holder, since the benefit is done on the account holder's Maryland income, if someone lived out of state, they might have zero Maryland income, and so they could qualify. And so this change will save us about $300,000 a year. There is favorable testimony in your folder from the Maryland State Education Association, the Maryland 529, the Comptroller, the Cash Campaign for Maryland, and the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. The changes recommended in HB 1238 are keeping with the spirit and the intent of the original legislation that created the Save for College program. It will allow us to continue supporting low and middle income families as they save for college and allow us to help more of them. And we will close the loopholes that allowed for the abuse and of this well-intentioned program. So thank you, and I ask for a favorable report on HB 1238.
Thank you very much, Delegate Forbes. And we have joining us providing both written testimony and oral testimonies favorable is Robin McKinney with the Cash Campaign of Maryland. Ms. McKinney, thank you for being here. If you could limit your testimony to 2 minutes, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, my name is Robin McKinney. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Cash Campaign. Just wanted to highlight in a visual way here what we're trying to do with House Bill 1238. As Delegate Forbes mentioned, we worked on this really hard with over the interim to figure out how we could best target where the program had gone off the rails and where abuse was happening, and how to get it back to the true spirit of the College Affordability Act of making sure that low to moderate income individuals and families are able to access the match program. So I'm going to use the term state match for this contribution just to make it easier. And I'm going to, for account holder, I'm just going to say parent, and beneficiary, I'm going to say child, because otherwise you all will get just as confused as we are when we were having these conversations back and forth about who we were talking about. So again, just sort of on this first slide here, you can see that this program was really about encouraging savings habits in children for both low-income parents and their children. This is happening. We are really encouraged at how many first-time low to moderate income families are opening a 529 program and how many people are saving in it. So that is absolutely working. Unfortunately, as you can see from this first graphic here, is the web that some folks have been able to create of a network of parents, children, grandparents, neighbors, all sorts of folks who are all able to access the state match program has gone far beyond the intended impact that we wanted to have with this program. So all of the different changes that Delegate Forbes has laid out all get at a different part of the program and a different part of the problem. So it's really important that you see all of those pieces together, what you did through the BRFA last year, what all of these different pieces are able to change. So if you could go to the next slide again, which just sort of summarizes quickly those 4 changes, the biggest of which is the lifetime max. I want to flag that Maryland is currently the most generous match program for 529s in the entire country. Every other state that has a match program, it's a one and done opportunity. So your entire household, no matter how many children, no matter what your income is, it's one time and you're done. So the fact that Maryland offers this over time is incredibly generous. And we came up with the $9,000 max limit is if someone is getting $500 in the state match over the course of 18 years. So there is math behind this number. The adjusted gross income, again, we just wanted to say is really important. That's what most tax benefits and other means tested programs are built on, because it's before you take out a lot of deductions. So for example, an individual that's making $130,000 could actually qualify under this program after they had all of their deductions. So it's really about making it more in line with other programs and making sure that we're using a number that's a better reflection of someone's income. The residency is pretty clear. If you live in Florida, your Maryland income is 0. And so if you're a grandparent living in Florida, opening it up for your account for your grandchild, you will have 0 income in Maryland. Therefore, you're getting the $500 match, even if you're actually making $130,000. So again, getting back to the intent. And lastly, the beneficiary age limit of changing that to a max of 26 is with the idea, again, of just the original intent of this program of trying to help people to access and that sort of more traditional student. We understand that there are lots of older students. It's a population that we at CASH very much care about. And there are other supports also for those populations. So for this one match program, we thought that limiting it to the age of 26 for the child or the beneficiary made a lot of sense. Very happy to answer a lot of questions. It was a technical process, and thank you to Delegate Solomon, for Delegate Forbes, and everyone else who contributed to that. So with that, I urge a favorable report.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKinney. Also joining us this afternoon is Aaron Layton with the Maryland 529, who is here to provide information. Ms. Layton, if you wanted to say anything.
I think the delegate and Robin have covered everything. For the record, I'm Aaron Layton, Executive Director of Maryland 529. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Ms. Layton. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for House Bill 1238? Seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 1238. The committee will now move on to House Bill 1237, which is sponsored by fellow gentlemen from the Appropriations Committee, Delegate Corman. Bill Appropriation Statement, Memorandum of Understanding for State Personnel. Delegate Corman, please proceed when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm coming for you today with HB 1237. The bill as drafted is a little bit confusing, as is the fiscal note. I can feel the antenna of my colleague from the Eastern Shore going up. So let me just try to explain the bill. If you could try not to read it for a moment. I think the text of the constitutional amendment does not get at what the purpose is. So just to be clear, the purpose is to add binding arbitration at the end of the negotiation process for our collective bargaining for our state employees. Now, to do this, we need both a constitutional amendment and enacting legislation. What's before you is only the constitutional amendment, but I would expect that in a future year, if the constitutional amendment were adopted by the people, or perhaps if this doesn't move this year and we move it in a future year, there would be alongside it a piece of enactment legislation to get at what I'm sure would be many detailed points and provisions that you all could help raise if this moves forward. But I think the broader question is, why do I think binding arbitration is needed for our state employees? It's because the current process isn't working. Now, coming up after me will be a number of subject matter experts, people who are state employees, people who work with our state employees, who can talk about more of the details. But I think everyone on this committee, based on all the testimony we hear, is well aware that something is not working right with our state employee negotiations. We have many negotiations that never conclude and ultimately end up with the governor dictating often unfair terms. And we have disparate treatment of our workforce. Some units are receiving step increases in COLAs, others are receiving contingent increases depending on how close the Board of Revenue Estimates gets to guessing the right, projecting the right amount of revenue that we're going to have. Just some very strange things that occur. Binding arbitration is not unusual. It's not unique. It exists in a few other states, statewide for employees, and then a lot of our local governments use it for some aspects of their local public employees and workforces. There are certainly lots of details to discuss, but the basic idea is this. When an impasse is reached in negotiations, instead of going to a voluntary fact finder, non-binding process, or just waiting for the governor to submit a budget to the legislature, a neutral third party would have before them the arguments of the workforce and the management, in this case, the Department of Budget and Management, to make a final neutral binding decision that would then be included in the governor's budget when it's submitted to fund the results of that decision as it relates to salary, healthcare, fringe benefits, and so on. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and discussion. I'm hoping, Mr. Chair, that the actual subject matter experts can testify before that, and then we can get on to the questions if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Delegate Corman, for introducing the bill. This afternoon, we have several oral and written testimonies that are provided. First, we will hear from Mr. Lance Kilpatrick with AFSCME Council 3. Mr. Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Appropriations Committee. Good afternoon. Once again, for the record, my name is Lance Kilpatrick with AFSCME Council 3. May of this year will mark the 25th anniversary of collective bargaining for Maryland state employees. In the years since Governor Paris Clendenning's executive order, Maryland has continued to improve its collective bargaining practices to have in place processes that are fair, balanced, efficient, and conclusive. This proposal adheres to that path. The concept behind collective bargaining is to establish a forum for management and labor to periodically sit down at the table to formally discuss issues including equitable compensation, leaves, and benefits, processes for employees' input and participation, and myriad other terms and conditions of employment. The linchpin of collective bargaining is a mutual understanding and respect for the process itself, where finding common ground through deliberation and compromise is acknowledged by all parties. Unfortunately, compromise is not always the case, and under present Maryland law, an employer within state collective bargaining can effectively refuse to move from their initial positions and thus create a stalemate that has no resolution. Without incentive to work toward agreement through compromise, there is no concern for the consequences of inaction. This legislation would create a mutual incentive to compel parties to reach an agreement. As Delegate Corman explained, it does so through a binding interest arbitration process. My colleagues next will not only go through the concepts and rationales behind binding interest arbitration, but will also reference the real-life consequences that are happening because of our existing system. House Bill 1237 is a strong and positive step toward enhancing fairness, balance, efficiency, and resolution. It follows a model that is well established in other states and among Maryland counties. We thank you and urge a favorable report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kilpatrick. And to the rest of the witnesses, just as a reminder, 2-minute time limit on the testimonies. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Don Hawkins with AFSCME Local 3675.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Don Hawkins. I'm the president of AFSCME Local 3675. We represent the Maryland State Police civilian employees. While we work side by side with our sworn colleagues keeping Maryland safe, my members and coworkers feel an injustice on how our pay and benefits are determined based upon ineffective negotiations. Here's just one example. We're currently losing police communication operators at an alarming rate. These dedicated men and women are the critical radio link between the public and the troopers. Yet while our colleagues' negotiations resulted in a 15% in COLA and 2 step increases, the best and final offer for our agreement was a contingent $500 bonus. A year from now, another very contingent 1% in 18 months. No step increases, and the state walked away from the table. To be clear, my testimony on this bill is not about the final numbers. It is about the ineffective negotiation process. To put this testimony in context, I need to let you know this is my retirement job, and my way to continue serving my community. I've spent all of my working life, when not in a Marine Corps uniform, on the opposite side of the bargaining table. I have worked companies out of Chapter 11, and I've built and sold 3 companies, including a defense contracting company. I'm quite familiar with the negotiating table, and I'm also very familiar with the purpose and value of a union within a large workforce. I've benefited by fostering and maintaining professional working relationships with the unions that represented my employees. With the understanding of what can be accomplished through mutual respect, I accepted my position as a union local president, and I have great respect for the Maryland State Police professionals I interact with in employee-related matters. I also recently served on AFSCME's bargaining team with the state over the latest contract negotiations. I was shocked and disappointed to discover that at this level, we do not have a professional working relationship between management and labor in the state of Maryland. The relationship that currently exists does not foster a climate for successful negotiations. It starts late, it drags out with an inordinate amount of time focused on petty issues, leaving little time to focus on serious hours, wages, terms, and conditions issues that directly impact the services and the employees. The current negotiation process has no sense of urgency for either party to reach compromise. The current system simply wastes the time of the people tasked to be a part of the effort because it quickly breaks down. One side is pleading for the benefit of the predominantly lowest paid workers in the state, and the other side is simply advancing an objective dictated by people who are not sitting at the negotiating table. This system is not good for management. It's not good for the state workforce. It's not good for Maryland taxpayers. It's not the spirit nor the intent of the collective bargaining process implemented by legislation by elected legislators. Management, labor, and Maryland taxpayers deserve a process that compels compromise and finality. That's why I'm here today in support of binding arbitration, House Bill 1237. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hawkins. Next, we will hear testimony from Mr. David Wright with AFSCME Council 3.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair. I'm David Wright. I'm with the law firm of Conn Smith & Collins. I've represented proudly AFSCME Maryland Council 3 for greater than 10 years. And the system that Mr. Hawkins just described that is so frustrating would be greatly improved and frankly resolved by binding interest arbitration, a process that I've seen firsthand through many of Maryland's counties, its municipalities, and have heard about in other states. In Maryland, it is not an uncommon impasse resolution procedure. And what it brings to the process that doesn't currently exist is rationality and a drive towards reason. It's been my experience that binding interest arbitration truly motivates the parties to negotiate and to reach an agreement. Although they have resort to a new process, the pressures from that process actually create more interest in getting a deal done on the terms that the parties can agree to. That's so because at the end of the day, there's a process where the parties actually have faith in evidence and rationality and the capacity to go to somebody to break impasses that build up due to political circumstances, that build up due to passions, that build up due to the history of the parties. So having a professional neutral ultimately potentially hear the positions of the parties motivates them to come to the table with evidence, come with equal and more middling positions, and to move incrementally towards the middle on terms and in ways that are consistent with standards that you, the General Assembly, will ultimately set out. It's a neutral arbitrator does not work in a vacuum. They're not given unlimited power. They are given the power and apply the standards that you all will dictate. For those reasons, we urge a favorable report on this constitutional amendment, and I'll welcome further questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wright. Next, we will hear testimony from Deborah Graves Latson with the ASME Local 112. Deborah Graves Latson. Okay. Well, at this time, we will also, the committee.
Mr. Vice Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry, she is on the screen, but for some reason her vocals are not working.
Okay. Let me make this quick.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Okay, excuse me for that.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Deborah Graves Latson. I work as a family service case worker, and currently I'm a proud member of ASME Local 112. I have worked for the state for 13 years. In my 13 years of working for the state, I have only received 3 step increases. This is far below what I should have received given the years. This has happened to other ASME members, yet there are other state employees that receive numerous increases over the years. Why is that? I love my job and I perform it well, but I feel like the state does not respect that love. There should be equity and fairness applied, yet right now it's not happening. My hope is that this legislation will bring binding arbitration to collective bargaining and fix wrong practices. It's the right time to do it and the right time to do it. Having a process to promote compromise and agreement is a good course of action. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Graves Latson, for your testimony. And any members, if we could note that there's also favorable written testimony by Roger Mano, Mano Associates LLC, favorable written testimony by Terry Kavanaugh with SEIU Maryland and DC State Council, favorable testimony for Angelo Fasoli with the FOP Lodge 89 and Maryland State Lodge, and also favorable written testimony by Andrew Mayton with the Maryland Classified Employees Association. The committee will now take questions. The gentleman from the Eastern Shore is recognized, Delegate Grice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my first question among many is that how many bargaining units are we seeing an impasse right now? I know that AFSCME there's been an impasse over the last couple of years, but are there any others that we may not know about?
So Delegate, before I let Mr. Wright or Mr. Kilpatrick answer that, I just want to be clear that it's not only impasse that this bill would help address, it's also the outcome when there is a negotiated outcome. I think would be done better if there was binding arbitration as sort of the final end game of the process as opposed to what we have now. So I just want to put that in context before I think your very good question is answered by Mr. Wright or Mr. Kilpatrick.
Lance, shall I address that one?
Please do, sir.
Okay. Delegate, there is no impasse procedure right now, so there's never technically impasse to be declared, is the short answer to your question. What happens is there's a statutory deadline for economic matters, which are of course, kind of the exalted, most critical issues for employees, as you heard from the witness just before me. And the parties will try to make an agreement about economic matters. Push comes to shove. On January 1st, the governor is entitled to create his budget and as he sees fit, whether an agreement was reached or not. So there's no actual moment for the union to say, we can't agree with you, we need to refer this to some other forum or some other method. They bargain, they go up to December 31st, New Year's Eve, and if no agreement is reached, there's no other proceeding. It's just the governor says, what I've offered is it. That's, you take it. There's no other option.
All right, so I guess I should ask it in this way. I remember hearing testimony just a couple of weeks ago where some state employees were represented by other unions other than ASME were getting step increases. It was just the ASME employees who were not. Is that correct?
Delegate, I'll answer that. The members of SLEOLA have consistently gotten step increases over the years. AFSCME Council 3, MPEC, AFT Healthcare have not received nearly the number during this time. In fact, if you go back approximately 10 years, you'll see that Sleola has received about 3 times the number of step increases than other state employees.
Because when you guys negotiate, it's more than just salary. You're talking about workplace safety. You're talking about the entire compensation package beyond just. So, I mean, are we in a situation too where maybe AFSCME is asking for more, and maybe AFSCME is being more unreasonable than some of these other bargaining units? Because it seems to me that, you know, what we're hearing is that the impasse is really with AFSCME and not so much the other bargaining units.
Well, Delegate Grace, that's the beauty of having something like binding arbitration. Then it's not you or I deciding what's reasonable or not, although I know you and I have very strong opinions about that, but it's the neutral arbiter who can look at that and decide, is AFSCME or the administration being unreasonable?
Well, that's a huge concern for me, is because whoever this arbiter is, we don't know, we have no control where they're coming from, and they also don't account to the public as well.
Sure. Well, we can have a lot of control over that, Delegate. As I said, this would require what I'll call sidecar legislation for enactment. And so you in particular, as a member of the Personnel Subcommittee and a member of the Appropriations Committee, would have a lot to say about where that person comes from, what their accountability is, and so on. But you had asked, you had made a reference to, is AFSCME being unreasonable, or MPEC or AFT or Sleola? I'm sure you weren't just picking on AFSCME in particular. And that's sort of the point. Let's let a neutral arbiter who can really dig into both sides help determine what's reasonable, and not the administration, which obviously has its perspective. You or I, we obviously have our perspectives, or the workforce, they obviously have their perspectives. That's the point of a neutral arbiter.
But that neutral arbiter will not be someone who's elected by the people. Is that correct?
Right. So the neutral arbiter, I mean, I suppose we could draft legislation however you wanted to try, Delegate, but it would be unlikely, I would say, for the neutral arbiter to be someone who's elected by the people. But there are different provisions you can put on that arbiter's decision-making to help ensure that they're factoring in things that you or I might care about.
And they could make decisions that are in the tens of millions of dollars. Is that correct?
Well, they could, but again, we'll have the ability with the technical legislation for implementation to address some of those issues if this were to go forward.
All right, thank you.
The General Lady representing Carroll and Howard County is recognized. Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just want to explain what will ultimately be my vote and my concern. And it's pretty much of a throwback to the origins of unions and the origins of public service unions. And I have said this before, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was certainly a progressive Democrat, his attitude is that public unions would be unthinkable and intolerable. He's very strongly against them, and it took a long while for that to change. And my reasoning is this: when you have a union in a private company, it's for them to share in profits. The employer has a very strong motivation to do some good negotiating because he has his own money at risk. Although I know most of us would like to guard the taxpayers' funds, we are negotiating with somebody else's money. And that is never going to be as fair as, and a lot of the motivation will be political. So there's nothing against this particular union, or I don't like binding arbitration anyway. I was a labor lawyer for a number of years, but I did want to let you all know that that was my position, and I apologize for not having a good question.
Isn't that so?
Yes, it is so.
Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for House Bill 1237? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 1237. The committee will now move on to House Bill 862, St. Mary's County Delegation, St. Mary's County and Metropolitan Commission debt limitations. And we have presenting the bill, Delegate Gerald Clark. Delegate Clark.
I can tell you Delegate Clark is here.
For House Bill 862, do we have a member who is presenting the bill?
Delegate Clark's here. It looks like he's having trouble with his audio.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Delegate Clark, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for that technical difficulty.
That's okay, Delegate Clark. Delegate Clark, you're here to present House Bill 862, St. Mary's County Delegation.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. I'm here today to present House Bill 862. For the record, my name is Delegate Jerry Clark, 29C, Calvert, St. Mary's. House Bill 862 is a modification of the debt limitations for St. Mary's County. What we're asking is to make a change, and we have an amendment that was forwarded to your committee, I believe, in the last couple of days. And basically what this does, it requires it defines the debt limitations on the county on their total debt indebtedness. What we're looking to do is to give the St. Mary's Metropolitan Commission the ability to have a certain percentage of the debt limitation of St. Mary's County. The debt limitation amount is 3.15% that we're asking for of the assessable taxable personal property tax of St. Mary's County. Of that amount, we were looking for the St. Mary's Metropolitan Commission, which is their water and sewer, quasi-governmental water and sewer division, to be able to use a minimum of 40% of that 3.15% of the assessable base indebtedness. And the rest of it would be used by the county for whatever bonding projects that they feel they need to do. The only other part of the bill would be for in line 36, there's some old language. It goes back into the 50s that would allow the Metropolitan Commission to into debt up to 25% of their assessable base. We need to change that and make it 2%. And that basically is the gist of the local bill. And we would look for a favorable report on this. And I'm allow the Metropolitan Commission.
Thank you very much, Delegate Clark, for presenting House Bill 862. Members, in our packets, there's also favorable written testimony by Louisa Balcom with the Maryland House Delegates, favorable with amendment written testimony by Angela Blondino, Commissioners of St. Mary's County, favorable with amendments testimony by George Erickson with the St. Mary's County Metropolitan.
Don't you see?
And also favorable with amendments written testimony by the St. Mary's County Delegation. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee regarding House Bill 862? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here, Delegate Clark. And that concludes the bill hearing for House Bill 862. Next, the committee will move on to the last bill of today, which is House Bill 1099, Delegate Carr, Historic African American Cemeteries Preservation Fund and Study. Delegate Carr, thank you very much for being here. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the Appropriations Committee. Happy Black History Month. For the record, my name is Al Carr, and I'm pleased to present House Bill 1099 as the lead sponsor. This bill is important because it provides a way to remember our past and honor our ancestors by protecting and preserving their final resting places. House Bill 1099 establishes the Historic African American Cemeteries Preservation Fund, administered by the Maryland Department of Planning in coordination with the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. The bill also requires the Department of Planning, in consultation with concerned stakeholders, to study and report on issues facing historic African American cemeteries in the state and the types of preservation or other activities used in other states. The bill takes effect July 1st, 2021, with respect to the study and the report, but the bill otherwise takes effect in 2023. House Bill 1099 is not a new bill. It reflects the work of many stakeholders over the course of more than a year. I want to give credit to Delegate Pam Queen. She introduced House Bill 1512 of 2020, which was heard in HGO. The bill before you is an updated version of her bill. I think the biggest change is the addition of the study, which was requested by the Department of Planning last year. I ask for your favorable report, and in the interest of time, I'll hand it over to the other supporting witnesses.
Thank you very much, Delegate Carr, for presenting House Bill 1099. And on our witness looks like we have 19 witnesses who are signed up. So to all the witnesses that are out there, if you could please limit your testimony to 2 minutes, we'd really appreciate it. The first testimony is favorable, both written and oral, by Eileen McGuckin, Coalition to Protect Maryland Burial Sites Incorporated. Ms. McGuckin?
She's still trying to log in.
Okay, we'll come back to her. Next, we'll move to favorable, both written and oral testimony, Eleanor Cowan with Preservation Maryland. You could please limit your testimony to 2.
You got it. Good afternoon. My name's Ellie Cowan. I'm the Director of Preservation of Advocacy at Preservation Maryland. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of HB 1099. As Delegate Carr mentioned, historic cemeteries provide critical connections between our past and future, but they also face the threats of time, environment, development, and neglect. Historic African-American cemeteries face compounded and significantly greater threats due to a long history of systemic land use inequities, leading to the loss of land ownership by descendants, the targeted demolition and development of historically African-American communities, and instances of purposeful destruction. The need for the preservation work that could be funded through this bill is very real and urgent, and it touches every corner of the state. The work that goes into the preservation of a cemetery can range from mowing to digitization of records. Unfortunately, many of those activities are not necessarily eligible for current capital grant programs or have difficulty getting funding through other preservation grant programs available. So this program established by HB 1099 could help fund those types of projects that fall outside of the purview of existing programs. The study that is created by this bill, we think is a very important step with the input of stakeholders like descendant communities and historic preservation groups. We believe that the recommendations from that study will result in regulations that for the new fund that will ensure support goes to the work of those who are doing the boots on the ground work of preserving Maryland's historic African-American cemeteries. There are already national and other statewide efforts underway with the African-American Burial Ground Network legislation moving through Congress, and Virginia has a program. Maryland has the opportunity to be in good company. There's serious threats and problems that won't be addressed by this bill, including access issues, but HB 1099 is an important step in the larger process of working proactively to protect our state's historic African-American cemeteries and address a history of systemic neglect and often purposeful destruction. So I strongly encourage a favorable report of HB 1099. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cowan. We'll go back to Ms. Eileen McGuckian with the Coalition to Protect Maryland Burial Sites. Okay, Mr. Red.
I'm here.
Okay.
I am here. I had to find my unmute. Okay. Shall I go?
Please proceed. 2-minute limit.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Eileen McGuckian, the president of the Coalition to Protect Maryland Burial Sites, which strongly supports House Bill 1099. We formed in 1992 when a horrific situation in Howard County awakened us to the grim plight of too many cemeteries in our state. The Black presence in Maryland has always been large and significant. For nearly 400 years, burials have been in family plots, churchyards, and community cemeteries. Unfortunately, many families no longer own their land. Congregations have moved elsewhere, and even larger sites have been neglected. African-American cemeteries are overrepresented in the numbers of abandoned and unmaintained sites today. Grave sites have sunk, markers and fences are missing and broken, access is difficult, sites are overgrown with weeds and dead trees, and disrespect and vandalism goes on. These fragile sites can be found in every Maryland county and city, although only about half of these jurisdictions have inventories, and even fewer actively protect cemeteries from disappearing in the name of progress. Based on available information, I estimate that African American sites comprise about 1/3 of the known cemeteries in Maryland, and that about half of those are lost or in poor condition. A high percentage lacks ownership information, basic maintenance, burial documentation, or public attention when nearby changes are proposed. Identification is vital, as is the study period this bill authorizes. It will encourage surveys where they don't exist currently, obtain statistics on the numbers of needy sites in each jurisdiction, and I predict bring out hundreds of descendants and volunteers to assist in this effort. This bill requires no amendments. It is straightforward. It applies throughout Maryland. As President Kennedy once noted, a rising tide lifts all boats. Preservation of these sites will serve to help write a history of injustice for the benefit of future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Guckian. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Reginald Bishop.
Yes. I'm Reginald Bishop, lifelong resident of Maryland. As a child, I recall some stories of saying, oh, they're buried behind cousin Madeline's house. Oh, they're buried behind cousin such and such's house. So as an adult, 30 years ago, I started doing my genealogy and family research and found a neglected cemetery, several neglected cemeteries. This bill I highly favor, and I hope you do also. Cousin Madeline's house was abandoned and a development built around it, but the cemetery was left in its state that it's become a natural state. So our cultural resources are highly important, and not only in my personal family history, but for the African American community. I have been in touch, and people have reached out to me, not only with my family history research, but they have come across many, many cemeteries and burial sites throughout Maryland and ask me, what can we do and what resources or who knows about them, because a lot of them are unidentified. So I asked the committee to favor this bill, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop. Next, we will hear favorable with amendment testimony from Ari Gutman, Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition.
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and thank you to Delegate Carr for bringing this issue, like this really, really important issue here into this platform. I want to clarify that I support this bill only if amendments are made to the bill, and that without the amendments that are being proposed by members of BACC, I just genuinely find this bill insufficient. And a lot of the work that we've been doing with BACC has been like directly with descendant communities. And because of that work, we've learned how, sorry, I'm like kind of nervous, honestly. I just want to say one thing really quickly. I take issue with this idea that these burial sites were just abandoned or left. Like the KKK forcibly pushed people out. This isn't a question of just Black people not knowing how to take care of their cemeteries or their cultural property. This is a problem of a history in Maryland of people being forced out. And then now for white institutions, white preservationists to say like, give it to us to take care of, like, that's not the problem here. The problem is that Black people historically in the country have not been given the power to take ownership of their own history, of their own property, of their families' bodies. Like we've watched in Moses tombstones be unearthed by private contractors. Like this is, I'm Jewish, you know, like I think about the Holocaust and the way that I don't know where my ancestors are buried, and I'll never know that. And like, sorry, it's just frustrating. Like this isn't like this isn't just a thing that happened. This is like history, you know? And so we're here today and we can correct this by giving power to Black people, Black descendants. And the conversation that we're having is how white NGOs and preservationists can better take care of this land. we know who can take care of this land. We know who can take care of their ancestors in the best way. Like the issue with this bill and the amendments that BACC proposes will fix this issue and will give power to Black people. And that's what we need to do with this issue, because these are Black cemeteries. These are not my ancestors. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear testimony favorable with amendments from Rian Adamian with the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, Vice Chair, and to the members of the committee, as well as Delegate Carr for bringing this issue to the General Assembly. My name is Rena Damian, and I'm with the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, whose proposed amendments give Black descendants control of their own ancestors and of their history at every step of the process. Without these amendments, I would also oppose the bill as is. So what I'd like to do is provide those of you who are unfamiliar with BACC's work a rapid overview of the coalition's work of over 5 years to preserve Moses Cemetery on River Road in Bethesda, Maryland. And Moses is only one cemetery under imminent threat and whose descendants have been locked out to decision-making about how this cemetery will be preserved. Moses is the final resting place for both Africans who were kidnapped and then enslaved at adjacent death camps in the area, and for members of the Black River Road community who united in the area following emancipation, and whose rich history others will speak to. The prospering community was terrorized from their homes by white supremacist groups in the 60s when Moses Cemetery was razed so their history could be erased and their land redeveloped for white people. One portion of Moses now lies under a parking lot owned by the county's Housing Opportunities Commission, who have refused to come to the table with the descendant community. Another portion of Moses is being desecrated right now and redeveloped again, just like over half a century ago. This past summer, the descendant community of Moses and BACC witnessed a development team steal funerary items left for family members, unearth and ignore a tombstone, and remove cubic tons of unfiltered soil and cultural property, taking it to a dumping site miles away to raise it. You can see evidence of the racist illegal desecration behind me. Despite all this evidence of desecration, State Historic Preservation Officer Elizabeth Hughes denied the coalition's request for a stop work order in June, despite the fact that the developer receives federal funding through PPP loans and therefore is required to undergo a Section 106 process that would involve the descendant community. Similarly, County Executive Mark Elrich, State's Attorney John McCarthy have all ignored the evidence of this illegal desecration the coalition has sent them. And similarly, the Coalition to Protect Maryland Burial Sites and Preservation Maryland have known about this situation since 2016, but have never reached out to the descendant community nor spoken out against the genocide that continues today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And this is why descendants need to be in control. This needs to be enshrined in law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we will hear favorable amendment testimony from John Cook. John Cook.
Yes, hello?
Yes, please proceed when you're ready. 2-minute time limit.
Okay. Hello, committee members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak out in favor of this bill passing with amendments. I urge you to pass this with the amendments attached because just to ensure that historic Black cemeteries across the state can be taken care of by people who are descended from those buried actually in a cemetery, which seems to be a very obvious decision. This bill should recognize and uphold the Black people that are descendants of those interred actually have access to the remains of their family and ancestors. Since this land had been taken in various ways from the descendant community over time, they don't own the land anymore and therefore are not in a position to advocate very well on their own behalf, I guess, be at the table. And we want to make sure that the family of those descendants actually can speak on their own behalf here. We think that there actually should be some civil penalties for the desecration of this land over time, again, because nobody could really speak for it. The descendant communities were locked out of the whole process, and that's what we're trying to rectify here now. And basically, we want to ensure that the bill is passed, but with the amendments. Otherwise, it does not serve the purpose that it should. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cook. Next, we hear testimony favorable with amendment testimony from Alexis Harper Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition.
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and thank you for bringing this very important issue to the front. My name is Alexis Harper. I'm a Maryland resident, a PhD student, and a former college instructor. And as such, Black narratives and their deliberate and careful preservation is a cause that I hold near and dear to my heart. When I used to teach, I would ask my students, who is controlling this narrative and who does the narrative benefit? I think that's the question that we're asking here. Upon moving to Montgomery County, I learned about the cemetery from the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, the names of those interred, a history of the area, and its significance. I would otherwise have no way to have known that this area was once a robust working class Black community. Further, I understand and have personally observed that the descendant community and its allies have fought countless days and nights to be actively involved in the preservation process. The BACC has proven itself not only to be an intellectual authority on the space, but a moral authority on this space, because these are people's lives we're talking about, Black people's lives who have already suffered under the enormity of racism in life, and now we see in death. So let me be clear. I do not support this bill without the amendments that have been suggested by the BACC. To pass this bill as is would be a travesty on the historic level, despite what it may seem when you initially look at it. As is, this bill is another way to funnel money to white preservationist organizations and shut out not only Black voices, but the very living Black descendants of this community. And there are already professional precedents and that have been set, and ethical precedents that have been set to give certain rights of informed consent and control to descendant communities. This is something that museums all over the country do, that archaeologists all over the country do. This is not anything new. And I think that's something that simply must occur in the situation in Bethesda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harper. Next, we'll hear favorable with amendment testimony from Mia Carmel with the Bethesda African American Cemetery Coalition.
Hi, thank you. We truly appreciate Delegate Carr for trying to address this problem. Unfortunately, as written, this bill is at best about consultation with descendant communities. The Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition supports this bill only with amendments, as many have stated before me. My name is Mia Carmel. I went to high school right down the street from Moses Cemetery at Walt Whitman High School. I spent my entire childhood living in ignorance about the history of the Black and African communities that had and have existed on River Road, and frankly, all over Montgomery County and the state of Maryland. The whitewash and white-controlled education system that I was raised in failed to acknowledge the disenfranchisement and exploitation of Black lives and bodies. Passing HB 1099 with the to put the legacy of Black and African history in the hands of the descendant community. In my opinion, Black leadership and oversight of these historical sites is absolutely essential in order to teach future generations the truth about the places where we live and learn. The future of a Moses Cemetery and a Gibson Grove Cemetery and other African cemeteries that are owned and controlled by Black and African folks means community, it means education, it means music, it means poetry, and it means liberation. HB 1099 as it stands will only benefit white preservationists. I want future students at Walt Whitman High School and schools around the state to visit Moses Cemetery, to see the graves and the rituals of African people, and to see with their own eyes the site where bodies of kidnapped Africans were thrown. We must learn from our history. The desecration of Moses Cemetery is a disaster. Therefore, without the BACC approved amendments, I oppose HB 1099 because by itself, it is neither necessary or sufficient to address the problem. Black lives matter in life and in death. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from favorable with amendment testimony from Marcia Coleman Adebayo, Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Marcia Coleman Adebayo. We appreciate Delegate Carr for introducing this bill. Unfortunately, as written, this bill will serve as a public funding stream for white preservation NGOs and will not benefit the many African American communities whose lands were either confiscated or stolen. The BACC only supports this bill with the amendments we've offered that put descendant communities in control of their ancestors. It is time to break America's addiction with whites having the financial resources to determine the fate of Black bodies, both alive and dead. White preservation organizations have come to believe that they are entitled to leadership over Black bodies. And when Black organizations step forward to assert control, we are considered hostile. For example, on August 14, 2020, when developers created conflict between two Black communities, one preservation organization named in this bill seized the opportunity to spread the rumors and ended her email with the comment, "It's been a long time coming." For the uninitiated, that's code language. That's what certain people said when Martin and the 4 little girls were bombed in Alabama. It's been a long time coming. Not one Black church or organization is named in this bill. The state's historic preservation officer, SHPO, who controls the Maryland Historic Trust, is named as a power broker in this bill. This organization issued a stop work order for a blacksmith shop on River and Seven Locks Road because the roofing wasn't period enough, but they ignored that blacksmiths made chains and shackles that tore the skin of our ancestors. The SHPO, however, wouldn't issue a stop work order 5 miles away where Moses lies, where Africans have been tortured and murdered on plantations, and where there was every possibility that we would find human remains. I would argue that the decision makers of African burial grounds must come from the descendant communities, and the funds to support the preservation efforts must be directed to the descendants of those burial grounds if we are to move beyond structural white supremacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear testimony favorable with amendment testimony from Jennifer Odence. Jennifer Odence.
Hello. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Odence. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm also in favor only with amendments. While the bill attempts to address historic injustices to African-American cemeteries, the bill is not acceptable in its current form. The control of African-American burial grounds, including human remains and funerary objects, must rest with the descendant community. Would decisions about the remains and artifacts of those murdered in the Holocaust be acceptable without the intimate involvement of Jewish leaders and rabbis? The agreements that led to the display of a pile of shoes in the U.S. Holocaust Museum as a powerful and tangible representation of the people who suffered and died in concentration camps were made with Jewish involvement. An exhibit made to preserve the history of the Holocaust without the involvement and approval of Holocaust survivors and descendants would perpetuate pain and deep disrespect. Black descendants must control the remains, funerary objects, and artifacts of their ancestors. It's a basic human right. This bill must be amended to require a memorandum of agreement with representatives of the descendant community before any grant is made or soil moved. Without such an amendment, the bill continues the disenfranchisement of Black people from control of their ancestors and history. Black lives matter in life and in death. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear favorable with amendment testimony from Martha Peterson with the Bethesda Africa.
Good afternoon. Can you hear an echo behind me?
Yes, we can. Do you have the YouTube on in the background?
No, no, I don't. Oh, you know what? I was looking at the assembly. Can somebody else go? I'll get out of it.
We'll come back to you.
All right.
Okay, next we will have favorable with amendment testimony from Segun Reverend Adebayo with the Macedonia Baptist Church. If you could unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the members of the committee. Thank you for this this privilege to testify on behalf in support of HB 1099 with amendments. My name is Reverend Shegun Adebayo. I'm the pastor of the Macedonia Baptist Church in Bethesda, Maryland. And I testify on behalf of our church and the Erased River Road African American community in support of this bill with the appropriate amendments. The Macedonia Baptist Church in Bethesda was chartered in 1920, remains the only institution that speaks of a once vibrant African American community on River Road in Bethesda, Maryland. It remains the custodian of our history and memories and the guardian of our cultural heritage. It is no revelation that the sad history of our people is one of domination, disregard, and disrespect. Over several decades, we were stripped of our rights and dignity and robbed of our land and the potential of creating generational wealth. Our historic cemetery, where our ancestors were buried, was desecrated to make room for commercial development. We welcome the trust of this bill and thank Delegate Carr for bringing this to public light. However, in its current form, it subjugates our community to a secondary or tertiary role. It is my humble opinion that African Americans should be in control of their historic cemeteries and memories. While we welcome the support of our white allies and organizations, however, they should not be written into the bill in a primary and determinant role. The bill must have as a central goal the correction of past injustices, visited on the Black community, especially with regard to the disposition of the burial grounds of our ancestors. Black organizations must be accorded the primary role of consulting with the Department of Planning on the granting of funds to qualified applicants. Developers and individuals should not be deemed qualified to apply for grants under this bill. Furthermore, Black churches and nonprofit entities with historic ties and demonstrated commitment to a burial ground should be given premier priority. The primary descendant community should have the right to the disposition of all bioarchaeological and cultural property resources contained within the African American cemetery or burial ground, including but not limited to human remains and objects of cultural value. We urge you to support the bill with the proposed amendments. Otherwise, we strongly stand in opposition to the bill in its present formulation. Thank you for your attention and consideration.
Great, thank you very much. We'll go back to Miss Martha Peterson.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, welcome. Thank you for allowing me to speak, members of the Appropriation Committee. I'm a retired health and physical education teacher and also a member of the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. And the reason why I'm here is because the preservation of African burial grounds is in a crisis mode. Too many of the cemeteries are being paved over, desecrated, abused, and so forth. So I'm here to support House Bill 1099 with amendments, of course. And I'm going to give you my reading. I have a written statement. Honoring those who came before us, our ancestors, is essential regardless of our ethnicity. Our ancestors deserve a proper burial and a sacred space to hold their remains. The Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition is committed to ensuring that African and African American burial grounds are protected, respected, preserved, and saved from destruction. They recognize that too many of these cemeteries are in jeopardy of being abused, desecrated, and destroyed, all in the name of private development and racism. Thankfully, my parents' and grandparents' graves are safe and protected. However, if their graves were tampered with, dug up, desecrated, or paved over, I would be devastated, sick to my stomach. Just imagine how you would feel if you had a loved one whose grave was treated as such. Any rational human being would not want this to happen to a loved one's grave. I'm grateful that the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition is addressing the issue of the destruction of many African burial grounds in Maryland. Also, I strongly feel that these cemeteries, out of all other cemeteries of other ethnic groups, are being targeted because of their cultural heritage. In closing, because of these statements, I strongly support HB House Bill 1099 with amendments. Thank you for giving me time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Peterson. Next, we will hear favorable with amendment testimony also written by David Mott with the Maryland Poor People's Campaign.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. David Mott here. I am with the Poor People's Campaign, also speaking on behalf of the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. And I echo everything that everyone else has said. With the Poor People's Campaign, we are in support of this legislation, but absolutely believe that it needs to be strengthened to be effective. And one of the I'm going to concentrate on one piece of that, but we certainly support the amendments offered through the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. You know, some people might think that this historical preservation is sort of a boutique enterprise. You know, it is not. What this bill represents is really the resurrection of historical memory of what happened in the past, of what some of my ancestors maybe have done in the past, where we have been, where we are, and where we need to go. And these properties represent a critical link to the truth of our past, and importantly, the historical struggle of a marginalized African-American society, recently released from bondage, you know, went through Reconstruction, went through the rise and the backlash of white supremacy after 1877 when the troops were removed, went through Jim Crow, persevered, built communities under all of that, built schools, built churches, built a real thriving society, and they were wiped out. They were wiped out. And it is a story really represented in this land of a people who absolutely believed in democracy and absolutely believed, ironically, in America, right? But there is real urgency needed here. As the previous speaker said, these sites are on the brink of extinction. They are being paved over, dug up, and carted off to dumps. That's what's happened in Bethesda. You know, another one not too far from the Bethesda African Moses Cemetery is in danger of being paved over and driven over as a result of highway expansion, right? This bill needs to be strengthened in this way, and that is this. In Bethesda, our experience is that nobody listened. Nobody listened. The developer knew what was in this property. The planning board, when they gave their permit, knew what was in this property. They had dealt with the coalition for years. They knew the controversy. They knew the people who were trying to defend this land and this property and this memory, and they ignored every one of them. Ignored them, right? No one would take responsibility for saying no. Stop, right? In this bill, there needs to be given to the agencies of this bill real authority to intervene, to stop development and the desecration of these cemeteries, of this land, of this memory, right? Given a petition from a citizen, it should be simple. A citizen, a descendant community, historical preservation society saying that we need to stop this. This land is historical. It's an African-American historical site. Boom. They have authority to stop it, to immediately have authority to undertake an archaeological survey of the land to determine what really is there, what is and what isn't. And then
if you could summarize your comments, please.
Yeah, and then have the authority
Thank you.
to mediate. Absent that, we will be looking to preserve things that are long gone.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next, we'll hear from Hannah Wolstein, providing favorable with amendment oral testimony.
Good afternoon. I'm here to testify in support of HB 1099 only with amendments proposed by the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. Delegate Carr, thank you for raising this conversation. The bill glaringly excludes descendants from leadership in establishing the historic African American Cemeteries Preservation Fund and Study. I stand in solidarity with BACC in supporting the bill only with the amendments that give the descendant community the voice they deserve. I grew up just off of River Road and only learned about the history of displaced African communities in Bethesda last summer, thanks to BACC's organizing to end the destruction of sacred grounds at Moses Cemetery. BACC has been working to bring attention to the historical injustice and educate folks like myself for years, so I'm late to this fight, but I refuse to stand by while the erasure of Black history continues in my hometown. The amendments have incredible potential to change the course of how this county addresses the violence of white supremacy. Start by granting ownership and control of human remains and cultural property to the descendants of those buried in historic Black cemeteries. Black people have the basic human right to be able to control their history, and white people should simply not be the ones controlling how Black people are able to protect their ancestors from exploitation and death. It comes down to affording Black people the right to self-determination, a human right that white people continue to violently suppress. Delegates, I strongly urge you to refuse to uphold systemic white supremacy by empowering the primary descendant community to control the process of honoring their community and ancestors. It is these descendants, not white-led organizations, that should be granted the loudest voice and control in decision-making regarding this fund and study. The cycle of violence must end here. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wolstein. Next, we will hear favorable with amendment testimony from Lewis Wolf. Lewis Wolf. Okay, we'll move on to favorable with amendment testimony by Lucille Perez with the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition.
I do thank Delegate Albert Carr and you, Vice Chair Mark Chang, and the entire committee for this opportunity. I think you have heard eloquently from my comrades in BACC, Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, about why it's important for this legislation, HB 1099, but also why it is imperative that the legislation only go forward with the amendments that have been applied to this legislation from BACC. I'd like to quote Toni Cad Bambara, and she says, "What are we pretending not to know today?" My comrades have given you a chronology of what has happened to the community on River Road. I am a pediatrician, and I have learned from Dr. John Chazelle, an icon in the state of Maryland. And he said, for optimal health, we must obtain the best possible emotional, intellectual, physical, spiritual, and socioeconomic aliveness that is possible. Without the amendments presented by BACC, this committee, in doing what they think is appropriate, will in its outcome spit in the face of what this state has been committed to do, and that is address the atrocities that have been going on in this country and in this state. If we do not keep accountability, both civil and criminal penalties for archaeological criminals and their fraudulent disregard of international standards, we do more harm than good. So keeping the tradition of this state and what our president has committed to do in rebuilding America to go forward without the amendments, this legislation will do more harm than good. Thank you for your time and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perez. Going back to Louis Wolf.
We have not seen him enter the waiting room, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wareheim. Next, we will hear favorable with amendment testimony, both written and oral, Tammy Hilburn.
Hey there. Bioarchaeological resources of African Americans must not be monetized and subjected to perpetual human trafficking within a societal matrix of inequity and compliance-based cultural resource management. Bioarchaeological erasure leads to skewed scientific data regarding populations of early trafficked Africans and African Americans. White supremacist zoning has been used historically against African Americans to defraud them of real property. Therefore, it's never surprising that specious use of zoning defrauds African Americans of important bioarchaeology and cultural property. Without appropriate descendant community oversight, such burial grounds remain a soft target for exploitative zoning and predation by developers and their cronies who have no real interest in proper stewardship. I believe that a common feature for many desecrated African American burial grounds is what I call the stratigraphy of hatred. In other words, the demolished architecture and cultural material of an historically displaced African American community bulldozed onto the associated burial ground mid-20th century, paved over, sanitized for your protection, sealed off for future exploitation by predatory developers, such as the case in River Road and Bethesda, who simply state that the strata consists of backfill soils and it's therefore not worthy of proper archaeological excavation. That was the master plan. Finally, now the real property is laundered of any African American cultural property through suspect compliance archaeology, flipped to extort the final proceeds of historic transnational human trafficking, the final last payout of the slave trade. In other words, no justice, no peace. I thank the descendant community from Moses Cemetery and the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, as well as Delegate Carr and the Maryland General Assembly for this opportunity to chat about HB 1099. It is a toothless bill without the BACC amendments, and it would only perpetuate the type of cultural property crime I have just run down for you right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, we will hear favorable with amendment oral testimony from Sora Edwards-Throw, Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition.
Hi, all. Thanks for giving us the time for this today. I work in grants for a living, so when I see a bill like this, I immediately start thinking, okay, there's a fund available, great, but who's in the room getting to make decisions, and what framework is that fund using? What framework is that study using? So when I see a word like barrier, I think about how it's really easy to talk about, oh, we just have to remove these barriers that are in the way, or, oh, these cemeteries are neglected, they just need some money to make sure that they're able to be maintained, when actually what we're looking at is a much deeper, more systemic injustice. And instead of doing an empty gesture or a favor or a handout to a community, it's really more about recognizing that community's rights and repairing the harm. So the reason that I and so many others are saying that this there needs to be amendments here, that this isn't going far enough, is because there's a big danger in not going far enough. You end up not tearing things up at the root, and you end up with a system that, as folks have said, is benefiting white-controlled, white-dominated groups that don't have the community's trust and don't necessarily have the community's well-being in mind. So instead of asking people to send in a grant, and maybe if it gets approved, they'll be able to have access to their ancestors and to their loved ones who have passed, we really need to start recognizing that this is a right, not something that is granted, not something that is a nice gesture. From even having this mindset of equity could be dangerous, because it's ignoring. It can be seeing a community as less than and need to be lifted up, instead of recognizing all the harm that has been done to that community as as Ari was saying earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear testimony from Eleanor Thompson. Eleanor Thompson. Are there any other?
I know that Eleanor Thompson is here.
Here I am. Can you hear me? I just happened to have to come out today. Thank you very much, Delegate Carr, for giving me the opportunity to testify on behalf of burial grounds. I just happened to come out to 10-Yard Cemetery, which is located in southern Anne Arundel County. This cemetery has been in existence throughout the African American community since 1832. I stand on the grounds right here at 10-Yard Cemetery, which is endangered. There was an original meeting house here in the area where African Americans, both slaves, enslaved, and free men and women worshiped at. The research that I have done with numerous African American cemeteries, such as Sharp Street, Asbury Broad Neck in Anne Arundel County, Asbury West Street in Anne Arundel County, needs more funding for research for the African American communities. This cemetery holds an occupant by the name of Primos Thompson, who was once in the War of 1812. He was in the skirmish down here at Tracy's Landing. I support Bill 1099 for research and historical significance of all African American cemeteries. And that's my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thompson. Just to go back through the witness list, is there a Louise Wolf here? Louise Wolf. Okay, are there any other witnesses on this virtual Zoom who would like to provide testimony that we may have missed? Okay, thank you very much for everyone who's provided oral written testimony today. We also have written testimony favorable by Josh Tolkien with the Maryland Sierra Club, favorable written testimony by Alice Wilkerson, Strong Future Maryland, favorable written testimony by Andrew Saunders, favorable written testimony by Bonita Austin, favorable written testimony by Lucille Walker, the Southern Maryland Heritage Area, and also favorable written testimony by Charlotte Troop Layton, Cabin John Citizens Association, and also with the Friends of Moses Hall, submitted by Charlotte Troop Layton.
Hello, I would like to testify too.
I also would like to testify.
Okay, 2-minute time limit. If you could announce yourself, and 2-minute time limit.
Okay, my name is Molly Houck, H-A-U-C-K. I'm with the Bethesda African Coalition too. We have seen members of the parts of Montgomery County government watch while remains of slaves were carted off in trucks this year. HOC, the Housing Opportunities Committee, the county executive, the planning department all watched while this happened. They didn't do anything to intervene. This is not right. These people need to be respected in life and in death. And as a white person, I am eager to see white supremacy go away. We've had too much power, and we have mistreated Black people forever since our country started. Previous laws about cemeteries and burial grounds have established rights for white people and white preservation organizations. It's high time to pass laws that preserve the rights of Black cemeteries and burial grounds and put the descendant communities in charge. The study proposed in the amendments would put the descendant community in charge of researching the issues and would provide funding for it. The goal is to transfer control to Black organizations and take it away from white organizations like the Montgomery County Planning Department, Maryland Preservation Trust, State Historical Preservation Organizations, and the Coalition to Protect Burial Sites. These organizations disenfranchise Black people and provide money to white organizations. Handing over control of Black cemeteries is analogous to African countries throwing off colonial rule and establishing their own governments. It's like defunding the police and putting money into things that police aren't equipped to do, like dealing with mental health issues. It's time to reduce white supremacy and transfer control of issues regarding descendants of Black cemeteries and burial grounds to Black organizations, and providing funding for them, and providing no additional funding to white organizations. So I only support this with the 4 amendments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hauk. And if we could next move to the Zoom panel that's listed Ruben.
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Ruben Pegues. I'm a first one to acknowledge myself as a Montgomery County student. I go to Walt Whitman High School, and just earlier last year, I had a protest at my school about systemic racism and found myself falling in love with the fight and just the family that is down at River Road, that is Moses Cemetery. And I would like to thank Delegate Carr for bringing HB 1099 into the forefront of this, but I can only support this bill with the 4 amendments from BACC, as without it, we'd just be continuing just white racism, and the continuation of that cannot happen. As you can see, I would just like to echo all the beautiful people who I've met and worked with who have spoken before me, and echo everything that has just been said. But we can only support this bill with the 4 amendments presented by BACC. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. At this time, the Appropriations Committee will hear questions. If we could do this, section it off. The questions first will go to Delegate Carr, Eileen McGuckian, Eleanor Cowan, and also Reginald Bishop. If we could, are there any questions for those, the bill sponsor and those witnesses? The gentlelady from Anne Arundel County is recognized, Delegate Shanika Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Thank you, Delegate Carr, for bringing what is seems like a very significant bill. You certainly have everyone's attention here. I wanted to ask if you've had an opportunity to look at the 4 amendments that are proposed by the BACC, and if you have a position on those amendments.
Thank you, Delegate Henson, for that great question. And I appreciate the work that you've done on this issue too. I was very moved by your remarks about the history of the city of Annapolis recently. So yeah, I mean, I've been working with all members of this community preservation community, including the Bethesda African Cemetery Group. You know, this is a statewide bill. It is based on Delegate Queen's bill from last year. You know, it's a mature bill, and it does a tremendous amount to study the issue and, you know, look at the best practices and to find a way to preserve and fund these places. You know, I've done my best to incorporate feedback from all stakeholders, including Bethesda African Cemetery. I saw a version of the amendments that they had proposed. And at that time, they did not appear to be in a format that they could be, you know, worked into this bill. Understand they refined those amendments. I have not had a chance to look them over, but I am firmly in support as the bill of the bill as introduced. I think that the bill is the way forward. I know this is not the exact bill that everyone wanted, but it's a statewide bill and reflects you know, over a year of work and with different stakeholders working together to put this bill together.
Thank you, Delegate Carr. I believe that what we're hearing is a desire to have more control at a community level there, particularly the community that's most impacted, those being the community of descendants. I know that we have historic preservation commissions that exist on local levels, and those preservation commissions, their approval is sought when a development is going to happen that would take it from the historic character. We started that here in Annapolis in the 50s, and it's the reason why Annapolis still largely looks like it did in the 1700s, is because the Preservation Commission saw that people were putting up electric signs and doing lots of things that were taking away the historic value of the city. And so they stepped in to make sure that if people wanted to build over a certain limit or do certain things, they had to require their approval. So it sounds like perhaps something that was similar in nature, where approval would be sought from a commission of interested stakeholders when there was development that was adjacent to properties. We know stormwater runoff, all types of things can erode the quality of these sites. And once that quality is eroded, it's very hard to try to rebuild and then preserve after we've lost ground, literally, in those sites. But that's what I believe I heard. And I didn't know if you had a position on adding in some things that would give more affirmative power to people who wanted to have a voice and a seat at the table.
Yeah, well, I'm open to whatever the committee wisdom is, but I do think the bill as introduced is a very strong bill, but happy to work with you and the committee.
Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Henson, for the questions. For all the witnesses here who are favorable with amendments, if you could hold off right now, we will have the members of the committee ask questions that are addressed to the favorable with amendments panelists. And for those who are in that section, so that we have order, if you could just raise your hand if you're interested in answering that question. So there's a raise hand function on the bottom of your screen. If you just use that at the appropriate time, then the witness will be addressed. The next question will come from the gentleman from the Eastern Shore, Delegate Greist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for you. And what we're hearing now and what happened in Bethesda sounds absolutely horrific. I can't imagine, someone or any group going to any community within the state of Maryland, black or white, and doing what happened there. But my question for you, and this is a statewide bill, obviously, and I represent 4 counties on the Eastern Shore. And of course, we have a history, that we're certainly not very proud of, not just the state, but in particular on the Eastern Shore. We have obviously a big ag community here, and we're making a lot of progress. Obviously, there's still a ways to go. But I haven't heard anything, at least in my district, in the 4 counties that I represent, about folks, disproportionately vandalizing or desecrating or developers, going after black cemeteries as opposed to white cemeteries or Latino cemeteries. I mean, are you hearing anything, at least in my district or the Eastern Shore or Western or anywhere else other than in the state besides, what we're seeing here in Montgomery County? In regards to like a disproportionate, and how we deal with our cemeteries.
Yeah, I mean, I would defer to some of the other supporting witnesses. I do know these sites can be vulnerable to development once they become, forgotten or overgrown. But I'll defer to my other supporting witnesses if they have anything to add to that.
All right, so I'm looking at the bill, and then the bill doesn't have any funding mandates in the bill, but I'm looking at the fiscal note, and it's just under $250,000 a year, and that's non-lapsing. Will any of that money go towards salaries at all, or is it?
Yeah, I think Ellie Cowan wanted to answer that last question. So I think some of that fiscal note comes from the study, which is a one-time expense, and that study was put into the bill at the request of the Maryland Department of Planning. So they envision that there is some staffing that would be needed ongoing. This fund is established. That's in the fiscal note. And I think the fiscal note also assumes an appropriation, which is not actually in the bill. So that's my understanding of that fiscal note.
And I know some folks talked about turning over land ownership to descendants. That bill doesn't do anything in those regards as far as property ownership, does it? Transferring land?
The bill does not transfer ownership. I mean, it has a study and it sets up this framework for this fund, that could be used for different preservation purposes that, can't be accomplished using some of the existing mechanisms in Maryland.
Okay. And so when we set up this fund, I guess in the Department of Planning or Maryland Historical Trust that's going to monitor this. Is that which agency again? Is it MHT or is it Department of Planning?
Eileen wanted to answer that one.
May I?
Ms. Calwin.
Maryland Historical Trust is part of the Maryland Department of Planning.
Sure.
And the Maryland the bill specifically identifies the Maryland Historical Trust, also the Commission on African American History and Culture, of which Eleanor Thompson is a member. And she testified today. So it does propose a number of stakeholders in this. And certainly that's just showing the kinds of groups that might get together during the study period and come up with appropriate language, appropriate eligible activities, and appropriate amount of money.
Okay. Well, this is something certainly I think we all might be interested in. And obviously the Maryland Historical Trust, they work for all Marylanders. And I think we can all agree that anytime you desecrate a cemetery or someone's grave, that it's an awful thing to do. And, certainly they should be protected by the government. So if this bill does pass, though, is this something that, are you guys going to focus entirely on just the Black cemeteries, or are we going to focus on protecting all cemeteries all across the state?
I can speak for my coalition, which would like to protect all cemeteries across the state. This bill happens to focus on Black communities and Black cemeteries because they have been the hardest hit over the years, as everyone has testified. And we don't have any problem with, erring and trying to catch up with some of that. What we need are inventories. We need to know which cemeteries are abandoned. We need to work on ownership. A lot of Black and white cemeteries you can't find who owns them in the SDIT records. They're horrendously poorly taken care of. People don't come and visit, or when they do, they are absolutely horrified. And we often get calls from them saying, "Can you help?" The coalition has a very tiny pot of money for which it has given grants to cemetery caregivers who have specific projects, nothing more than $2,000 each. They must match it. We see an equal number of Black and white cemetery owners there, for people who control it. It's a statewide issue.
Can I ask just that the first question to you? Is there any evidence statewide? Obviously, we in Montgomery County. Is there evidence statewide that Black cemeteries are disproportionately being treated worse than white cemeteries? Is there evidence of that? Because obviously, if there is, we have to do something about it as the legislature.
I think all the situations that the people from BACC mentioned, with the exception of white supremacist NGOs, but all of the kind of situations that they mentioned, whether it's development, whether it is churches disbanding, families leaving, they don't own the land anymore. That has happened. I am most familiar with Montgomery County, having led a Montgomery County cemetery inventory in 2018, which resulted in a couple of local laws, not sufficient, but some, and also some state laws. But all of these cemeteries need help. There are many, many abandoned cemeteries. You won't know numbers until every jurisdiction has an inventory. And as I testified, about half the jurisdictions do have surveys, do have inventories.
Well, I also like to see police records as well, because I want to know for sure that that if it's a problem, we have to certainly as lawmakers we should address it. But I want to know for sure that that this thing is happening, and if it's a statewide issue that we really do need to address. So thank you very much.
I think it is, and it would be a good thing to address during the study period.
All right, thank you very much, Delegate Grice. Thank you very much, Ms. McGuckin. We're going to very briefly, Ms. Cowan, if you want to provide any answers.
I did. I mean, I think, Delegate, that for two of your questions, the first being, were our African-American cemeteries disproportionately being targeted? Off the top of my head, immediately in the recent past, I don't know, historically, absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the biggest problems, is that a lot of our historic African-American cemeteries have been lost or have been, developed over. And so that is part of the larger problem of documentation and preservation that needs to be addressed. So while I understand your question was more directed towards, police reports of that happening now, I don't know of that necessarily, but it is certainly a problem that has historically targeted African American cemeteries than white or other cemeteries. And then as to your question about would this bill only be helping the African-American cemeteries? Yeah, the fund that would be established would be for historic African-American cemeteries specifically. With the being, I believe it would come under the purview of the Commission on African-American History and Culture, much like there's a capital grant program, preservation grant program that commission administers as well. It's incredibly successful. It's done a lot of good work. It's been funded since its creation, full funding at $1 million a year. The need is much greater. But as I mentioned in my testimony, that only covers capital costs, and a lot of the work that needs to be done in the preservation of cemeteries doesn't fall under capital, or if there isn't a capital project attached to it. So this is filling a need that is there statewide. And so, I think it leaves a lot of leeway to address the needs that the study with stakeholder input would be able to identify. Thank you.
Much, Ms. Cowan. Wanted to just take a pause here. We do have another favorable with amendment oral testimony by Louis Wolf. If Louis Wolf is in the virtual Zoom, if you could please provide your testimony.
I can do it on Zoom. Can you hear me?
Louis Wolf, thank you very much for being here. If you could state your name, 2-minute time limit. Please proceed.
Okay, yes. I submitted written testimony, which I believe you have before you. I would simply like to add now that I witnessed the destruction, the desecration on River Road. And as I was watching, I was in tears, literally in tears.
Mr. Wolf, did you like to add anything else? Mr. Wolf, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, if you could please summarize your testimony.
Okay. I submitted written testimony, but I would add today that I witnessed the desecration on River Road, as to many of us there. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you loud and clear. Please proceed.
Yes. And I witnessed the desecration with my own eyes. Yes. Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please proceed and please summarize your comments, sir.
I witnessed the desecration with my own eyes on River Road, and I was in tears, literally. And I ask you and all the delegates, if a cemetery in Georgetown or if a cemetery in Potomac was being desecrated, how would the people there feel about it? And let's be clear about this. We sent a registered letter to the county commissioner, Mark Elrich, with certified receipt. We never got a reply. And we're still waiting to hear from Mark Elrich. He is aware of this situation. He stood by and allowed the desecration to happen. It's a crime, really. So we are asking finally today, by the way, I will add here one more piece, that I also witnessed one of the construction workers pick up a bottle in his hand and hold it up to the light. And now this looks interesting. And this was a bottle from the turn of the century. He then put it in his pocket. Such a bottle, these pieces, which were buried with people, are today very collectible and worth a lot of money. So I ask you for this 1099 to be passed with amendments, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. We were glad that you were able to join us. So going back to members of the Appropriations Committee asking questions to the panel that is favorable. Next, we'll take a question from the gentleman from Montgomery County. If all the questions could be very succinct as possible. Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted a quick question for Delegate Carr, but I'm happy to get the answer offline as well. Just wanted to see what other states are doing to do this work, if there are best practices that we should be thinking about in Maryland.
Yeah, and I would defer to Eileen McGuckian if that's okay to answer that question.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I thought this question might come up, I did check quite a few things, quite a few states, and the only one that I found that actually has a fund for African American burial sites is the state of Virginia. That was put in fairly recently. At the same time, they also funded two other very specific sites. One was for Revolutionary and 1812 burials, and the other was for Confederate burials. So they had three distinct funds for those three. Other than that, other states, Oregon, Washington, New York, North Carolina, all over have funds for cemeteries, but they don't differentiate.
Thank you.
The committee will now hear a question from the gentleman from Baltimore City, Delegate Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Thank you, Delegate Carr, for bringing this bill before us again this year. I think this is, first of all, it's a very emotional topic because historically, I can't think of any group of individuals collectively whose history parallels that when it comes to burial grounds and property that's been used for those purposes other than the indigenous people of the state or in the country. And I think we have to do everything possible to ensure that and protect those sacred grounds of our ancestors. The question I have for you is, I've heard a lot of questions regarding evidence of various activities, problems across the state, et cetera. Would this bill, if it should pass, one of the functions would be to gather that information to see how extensive the problem is and to come up with solutions, working with stakeholders to address those issues. And I just leave my question right there.
Thank you, Delegate, for that great question. So yeah, the beauty of the bill, the way as introduced, is it includes this study aspect so that we can better determine what the needs are to recommend any regulations or additional legislation and to look at what's going on in other states. So I think the bill, as it was introduced, does exactly that, address that question through its inclusion of a study.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, just one quick follow-up question. So I'm to assume probably correctly that without the study, we really don't have the evidence that's needed to correct the problem and suggest legislation or other appropriate means to address the issue appropriately. So this is essential, and taking whatever steps that are necessary to preserve and protect the ancestral burial grounds and cemeteries of the history of certain demographics of individuals in the state of Maryland, correct?
That's correct. And in the bill, the study comes first, and the fund comes after the study.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Can I address that?
Who's speaking?
David.
If you could wait. Or
Sure. No problem. I just want to get my.
Yeah, please. Thank you. I have a list of people who've in the outer category who can answer. The gentleman from Baltimore County is recognized, Delegate Mangione.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you, Delegate Carr, for bringing a bill that I think has the potential of being very unifying, something I hope we can get figured out. But my question here revolves really around, I read some of Ms. Cohen's testimony where she discusses the bill, and I just read a little quote that says the legislation directs the Department of Planning with the input of descendant communities of historic African-American cemeteries, as well as the Commission on African-American History and Culture, the Maryland Historical Trust, and statewide preservation groups to study the issues currently facing historic African-American cemeteries, including identifying types of preservation activities. And then it goes on. So I think that's all great. My question is it your concern at all, based on, or Ms. Cohen's, I guess, as well, on what I believe was some divisive rhetoric and accusations from some who testified, whether these groups, again, the Department of Planning or descendants of communities of historic African-American cemeteries, and again, the Commission on African-American History and Culture, the Maryland Historical Trust, and statewide preservation groups, do you think that they will be tainted at all to handle this responsibility with some type of racial bias, as was presented by some of those who testified?
Sure. So yeah, thank you, Delegate, for that great question. So, I have complete confidence in our Maryland Department of Planning, with our Maryland Historical Trust, the Commission, the other entities that are named in the bill, in their ability to carry out the functions that are outlined in the bill.
Great. I think so too, and I think the way it's written is a good bill. Thank you.
The committee will now take questions from members to the panelists who are favorable with amendments. Are there any questions from the members for the panelists who are favorable with amendments? Okay, seeing none. Very briefly, I did write down a list of folks who did have their hand raised. If you could please be very brief in your response. First is Lucille Perez. Lucille Perez.
Yes, this is Lucille Perez. I guess the critical issue, and I think it was brought out by BACC, in that if this legislation moves forward without the amendments, we continue to oppress Africans and African American ancestors and their descendants by not putting the locus of control in the hands of the descendant community. So yes, it's important to study, but who is doing the studying? And if you are not presently using international guidelines to move the projects forward, how can we possibly trust that that is going to move in that direction once the legislation is passed? because those who have known about this atrocity have done nothing to date to do anything about the disparity
Ms. Perez, if
and
you keep it brief.
inequity.
Thank you. Okay, we'll just leave, if we could keep the comment responses brief, please, because we have a whole list of them. Next is the panel named Marsha Coleman. Very brief response, please. Marsha Coleman.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think there's a fundamental issue that we have to deal with. And it's an issue that I think, unfortunately, our society has tried to avoid asking. And that is, does racism exist in this country? Are we a society that was built on white supremacy? Are we a society that was built on the backs and blood and bones of other people? It's a hard question. I get that. But it seems to me that that's where the courage comes in. That's where our courage comes in. If we can finally get to the point where we understand that Black people were not even considered human. 40 years ago, no less today, I went to the cemetery today for an interview with one of the TV channels. And before I knew it, they were calling the police on me.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I just think it's important for people to realize that if I had been a white man, they would not have called the police on me today. But today, they called the police on me and endangered my family, and they endangered my life today, only because I was standing on the grounds of an African burial ground.
Sorry to hear that, ma'am. And thank you for your response. Appreciate it. Next, Rianne Adaman, and I apologize if I'm saying these names wrong, but the panel box then is named Rianne.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay.
I just want to speak to some of the comments that Delegate Al-Khar made. And first of all, thank you for working with us exhaustively to make our amendments more like what Ledge Council has, the sort of work that Ledge Council would do. And I understand Dana Phillips has kindly distributed that to the members of the committee. I would like to speak to your concern that this bill is a statewide issue, and that's true. And while all members of BACC have spoken to the act of genocide happening in Montgomery County, the need for Black people and Black descendants in this case to control their families' bodies and their own Black history and their own destinies is not secluded to Montgomery County, but it's also statewide and global. And so that is really the underlying message we wanted to send. And as we know, it's simply not the Black descendants that own the land or own the cemetery that are in the position to benefit first from this bill, but instead in line are owners who once this fund is made available to them without any priority or input from Black descendant communities, they're able to profit off of that. And that's how many people get into preservation in the first place. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Next, we will, just a brief response, please, from the panel box labeled Marsha Sagoon Adebayo.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I think I'll be brief because I think, Rian just made my point. There's no disagreement between those who are supporting the bill without amendments and those of us who are advocating, to amend the bills. And the issue there is that we are not mentioned. I mean, there's a general statement of consulting stakeholders such as the Central Committee. There's no Black church, there's no Black organization that is mentioned as being, primary in the design of the study and all the work that will be done in the cemetery. That is the issue that we are confronting. We're not children. We're not imbeciles. We're able. And we have demonstrated for 5 years that we have, passion and interest in, burials of our people. That's all we are saying, that the amendments will give us a voice, and that's all we're asking for. give us
Thank
a
you very
voice.
much. Thank you. Okay, next, the panel box, T. Hilburn for BACC. Very
there.
brief response.
Hey there. Thanks for letting me speak briefly. I think one of the primary concerns is that we had this, what Dr. Michael Blakey has called a 106-esque process that happened at Moses Cemetery. And, you know, we're seeing a lack of involvement of descendant communities by contract archaeological firms who might be in the employ of developers. They're skipping over some pretty significant archaeological protocols for human remains. And that is something that doesn't just happen in Maryland, it happens nationally, internationally. I'm the former Cultural Property Crime Program Manager for Interpol Washington at the United States Department of Justice. And I can attest to the fact that, you know, this site destruction is happening. It is a problem in Maryland. It's going to continue to happen. Nationally, there is a House resolution or HR 1179 that McEachin and Adams have put forward on Capitol Hill. So this is a national problem. It's nice that that this bill is being discussed. And I just want to state that, you know, this is a crime trend, a cultural property crime trend that's going to continue to happen. Desecration of paved over cemeteries, that's an issue. The human remains are the most important thing, and the bioarchaeological remains. We need that genetic information from enslaved Africans and enslaved African Americans. It's really important, and I want to advocate for the preservation of that bioarchaeology.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Appreciate it. Moving on to the panel box, David Mott, Rockville. Please unmute.
Yep, did that. So I just want to respond on the study issue, and I think the study is a good thing. We need to study the issue, find places. There are probably places out there that we don't know about. Earlier, a person talked about people buried behind his aunt's house, etc. But there is no need to delay the work of this agency, the agencies mentioned in this bill. We know places that are under attack. We, you know, people who are connected to know them. To delay work on preserving these sites will mean that more of them will disappear. So I would disconnect this study, which should be done, with the beginning of the work. The work should begin, the study should begin, and we need to be saving these places as soon as possible, not letting them to drift out of sight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mott. Ms. Lucille Perez, we've caught on you before, but if you wanted to provide another response very briefly, please proceed. Lucille Perez.
Yes, I think it has been stated that it is imperative that the descendant community have a place of leadership as this legislation moves forward. In the study, it has been explicitly stated by those who support this legislation with the 4 amendments put forth by BACC. And without those amendments, I was always taught as a physician, first do no harm. And I'm concerned that moving forward without the amendments will do harm.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perez. That is all the hands that we've seen as far as responding back from all the witnesses who are here today. Last question of this hearing, Delegate Metzger, very briefly.
Very briefly, I think that the stakeholders need to get together and get in a room and work this out. This is not the work group, and I feel like this is becoming the work group. So my statement is the stakeholders need to go back and get the amendments on paper and then go to the work group. That's my statement.
Thank you very much, Delegate Metzger. Thank you so much to everyone who has appeared before us on House Bill 1099. We really appreciate all your time. We had 20 witnesses on this bill, so we thank you everyone for your patience. We had to limit the amount of time so that we could be fair in having everybody allow their voice to be heard. We do appreciate you being here. It's a very sensitive issue, and we encourage you all to please work with the sponsor of the bill. And this time, that concludes the House bill hearing for House Bill 1099.
Mr. Chair, I must say that you have been professional and you have been respectful, and I thank you for that.
I would like to thank you for that as well.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate those comments. It really means a lot. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great evening. To members of the committee, we do have some quick announcements. Thursday at 1:30 will be a bill hearing. That's tomorrow. And also we will have budget hearings Friday of this week. Are there any other announcements from members of the House Appropriations Committee? The gentleman from Montgomery County is recognized, Delegate Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The subcommittee of Transportation and Environment will have a voting session following the full committee hearings tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Are there any other announcements from members of the Appropriations Committee?
Mr. Chairman.
The chairman of the Health and Social Services Subcommittee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe we're going to be having a voting session, excuse me, tomorrow morning as well. So just be on the lookout.
Are you okay, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, wrong pipe. Tomorrow morning, but be on the lookout for the email and the link. Thank you.
You're the chairman of Health and Social Services. Take care of your health. Are there any other announcements from members of the House Appropriations Committee? On behalf of the chairwoman, Maggie McIntosh of the House Appropriations Committee, we thank everyone for being here today at today's virtual bill hearing. Everyone have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank